So, the way I see it, I'm analysing my experience with Undertale, not the universal experience of Undertale. So I'm going to explain what I understand, what I infer from it, and what I think of it. This means that I won't be answering all the questions a player might have. This isn't a lore video, and I don't want to be hunting around a wiki to find out what actually happened, so, again, I'm going to stick with what I get from the game. This may lead to the video finishing without me technically analysing certain story beats that I didn't catch. I still believe this is a valid approach, as the alternative is to lie and act like I fully understood everything, which would mean I'm no longer analysing my experience with the game, while also being disrespectful to the viewer, because you deserve my honesty. This whole explanation may come off as, like, paranoid, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, let's go. Undertale is a video game that you already know about, but in case you don't, it's an absurd turn-based RPG where you can kill everything or nothing, created by Toby Fox with assistance from a few others. It became so ubiquitous on the internet that you no doubt recognise this fella or this noise. I didn't play it until this year and yet managed to avoid spoilers despite its popularity. I think its humour and charming characters are so mimetic that it ended up getting boiled down to a few key things, which meant that if you weren't actively engaging in discussion or community around the game, it was actually kind of hard to get spoiled on. I knew of its self-awareness, non-violent potential and Earthbound inspiration, and that was enough to make me want to play it. So after regularly checking the price on Steam for a year and a half and then buying it on sale because I'm a cheap fuck, I've played through, and I'm ready to analyse my experience with Undertale. As you launch the game, you're met with a brief prelude. It establishes that the two races of monsters and humans ruled the Earth, but that one day they went to war. The humans were victorious and sealed the monsters underground with magic. Time skips to the year 201X, and you're presented with Mount Ebo. As you're told that those who climb the mountain never return, you see a human child fall into the underground. The art is super cute, and the music reminds me of some really good Generation 3 or 4 Pokemon stuff, which is enough to get me excited. You reach the title screen, and when you proceed you see the controls. You will notice that your mouse doesn't do anything and that you use the arrow keys to move. This is a strange choice to make in 2015, but I'd argue it adds to its charm. I don't think it can be denied that knowing a game was made by a single person or a very small team adds to the experience. It immediately feels more personal, and little quirks and mistakes can be treated kindly by the player because, well, this one person made a whole game. They're bound to make some mistakes. So I was more open to the unconventional controls. To me, it also harkens back to Flash games, which were often made by one person and had simple, accessible controls, like using the arrow keys to move. So like I said, it adds to the charm, I think. You name the fallen human and start the game. You wake up right after the fall, having landed on a bed of golden flowers. After leaving the room, you see a cute little flower who's kind enough to teach you how the game works. You're taken into the combat screen and Flowey explains that the heart you see is your soul. Your heart can go stronger if you gain more LV, or love, the equivalent of levels. Flowey shares some love through white pellets, and by collecting them you almost die. Flowey is not to be trusted, and explains that the world is kill or be killed. The game does not wait to subvert our expectations. If the typical, easy, friendly tutorial can't be trusted, then what can? Well, Toriel, a monster who jumps in to save you from Flowey, restoring your health. Toriel is kind and affectionate, backed by sweet music. She offers to guide you through the ruins, so you follow. As you follow, it turns out that Toriel is the easy, friendly tutorial. The game has used the tutorial to subvert our expectations and quickly establish two contrasting characters. The monsters trapped underground would in any other game be the mindless drones you slaughter throughout, but Undertale makes sure you know that's not the case. The core gameplay mechanics are taught to you here. You're introduced to the simple puzzles you'll solve throughout the game. But now that I say that out loud, it's not really true. You're presented with the idea of puzzles, but Toriel can't seem to let you solve them. She coddles you and at times literally holds your hands through them. But this isn't really a bad thing. In fact, it further defines Toriel's character and lets you know that puzzles are usually quick, simple, and rarely look the same. You first experience combat by ignoring it. As a human, monsters will attack you, but you don't have to fight back. Toriel encourages you to start a conversation with the monster and says that if you stall, she'll come to resolve the conflict. So you go to a practice dummy, start a fight, and head to the act menu, choosing to talk, causing the battle to end. Not long after this, Toriel goes to get some groceries before you go to her house, giving you a cell phone to call her if need be. She tells you to wait where you are, but still isn't back after a few real-time minutes, so why don't we progress ourselves? A friendly monster will explain that if you act accordingly or fight until an enemy is almost dead, they may not want to hurt you anymore, and you can use mercy to spare them. As you go, you'll soon face your first random encounter. You fight a Frogget, the same type of monster you talked to before. By going to the act menu during the fight, you can compliment it. It doesn't understand what you said, but they blush, because they're flattered anyway. When it attacks, the same box with the controllable heart shows up. A little frog jumps around the box and you have to dodge it to avoid taking damage. Every enemy move is some unique little bullet hell challenge. This one is more like a bullet heaven, but trust me, they get fucking hard. This is such a unique, engaging way of building RPG combat. Stuff isn't controlled by percentages, and you never fall back on button mashing. Now that you've made the Frogget all flustered, you can head to the mercy menu and spare it. So in this fight, I was kind to the monster, who then realised that I was no harm, and no longer wanted to fight. It wasn't actually a fight at all. Sure, the Frogget tried to attack me, but I'm a human. Likely all they know of humans is that they stole the monster's freedom, so I can't really blame it. After exploring the ruins further, you come across a ghost named Napstablook blocking the way. This is the first boss and demonstrates how interesting and unique the battle system is. As you act to cheer Napstablook up, he opens up and eventually stops attacking you. The fight ends and he explains that he retreats to the ruins to avoid people, and yet he met someone who cares about him here. It's a super cute interaction that shows what the battle system is capable of. The mere fact that I'm befriending these monsters is so much more inherently compelling and rewarding than just killing them. It makes each fight more meaningful, as it's an opportunity to improve someone's day rather than ruin it, which is rare for a video game. This approach essentially gives a small arc to each fight. As you slowly win the enemy over, it makes these monsters not seem like enemies but characters who can change and have personality. I think calling them generic monsters is a purposeful decision to follow this method of labeling every enemy you kill under an umbrella, so you don't question why you're killing them. So it presents them under this familiar way that to video game players means you're good to kill, but then gives these monsters character to make us question that decision, not just in Undertale, but all the games we've played. Eventually you run into Toriel and she takes you to her house. The save point outside her house is called Home, almost as though the game itself is reiterating Toriel's overbearing nature. Inside, she surprises you with a pie she cooked for you. Earlier she asked if you preferred cinnamon or butterscotch, but the pie is both. Toriel is so dedicated to caring for you that she seems insecure about her own ability and confidence. Toriel puts both in, just in case you were just saying what you thought she wanted to hear. She's maybe too caring, but it's hard to be mad. She's clearly trying very hard to make you feel safe in a hostile world that in reality is not all that hostile. Toriel talks of you living here and has even got a room for you. It's clear she's not intending to let you leave the underground. Unfortunately for her, I'm playing a mute child in an RPG, so it's only inevitable that I go off on a great adventure. Looking around the home is comforting. You learn that Toriel likes bad jokes and reading by the fire, and the music is plodding. It soothes you as it strums away. It might not be that bad staying here after all. You ask Toriel about leaving the underground, but she seems reluctant to answer, soon retreating down the stairs. You follow her down, and she reveals that she plans to block off the one-way exit to the rest of the underground. She thinks you'll die out there, to the hands of Asgore, without question. To be fair, she's right, but this is a video game, so getting another stab at it won't be too tough. You try and stop her, and Toriel says she'll only let you out if you prove you're strong enough, and a fight starts. Luckily for us, we can act and end the fight peacefully, so we don't have to hurt her. I tried to talk to her during the fight, but I couldn't come up with anything to say. After a few turns, the game says that talking isn't the solution here. I was confused. There's got to be a way to spare Toriel. I keep trying to talk, thinking that if I stall enough she'll stop fighting, but she doesn't. At the beginning of each turn, you're given some text relating to the enemy's status, and it says that Toriel's acting aloof. Acting. I know she doesn't want to hurt me. In fact, once my health is low enough, her attacks actively avoid me, and while she does that, she looks away. She knows I know, but doesn't want to look at me and acknowledge it. But she's not saying anything. I figured that this was a scripted thing, that once I get her health low enough, she'll snap out of it and the fight will end, peacefully. So I start attacking her. I seriously hated doing it. The game has made me relate to her, made me care, but games often have scripted fights like this in the beginning, so surely I'll be fine. Her health gets lower, and I get more nervous. I decide to do just one more attack, and suddenly I do more than 300 damage. She's dead. Plenty of games have scripted fights like this, but Undertale isn't really like other games. She hopes that Asgore's plan never comes to fruition, and with her last words says this. I had been playing this game for only an hour and it made me almost cry at a character's death. I think that's pretty incredible. The moment it happened, I knew that I had officially locked myself out of the pacifist playthrough, but I didn't restart. I easily could have, it would only take 20 to 30 minutes to get back to that part, but it was so powerful and heart-wrenching that undoing it seemed wrong. I'd no longer be able to get the non-violent route, but I still never killed anything else for the rest of my playthrough, because I know that's what Toriel would have wanted. The first thing I did was go right back to the home. I was holding on to hope that another subversion would come along. Maybe she respawns too, like me. But no, it was wishful thinking. Instead, the home's filled with mournful music, and a kid who's suddenly very lonely. You exit the ruins and venture out into the underground proper and are met with Flowey. He hopes you're happy with your choice and mocks you, acknowledging that if you wanted to, you could go back and change it. He seems to be more aware than the other characters. He talks to you, the player, where everyone else more talks to the character you happen to be playing. You emerge into a snowy area with a thick forest following the path. The music is eerie, and as you walk, you swear you see something at the edges of the screen. It confronts you, and... It's Sans, the jokey skeleton guy who people on the internet, against all odds, want to fuck for some reason. He's supposed to hunt humans, but doesn't really care for it. You see a conversation between him and his brother, Papyrus, who by contrast is incredibly enthusiastic about hunting humans, in the hope that it will get him into the Royal Guard. They're both very obnoxious, but entertaining enough that it isn't grating. As you leave, Sans asks if you'll make Papyrus's day by letting him see you, a human. This injection of heart into these two characters is, I think, what really makes them work. It helps their annoying traits feel endearing, and makes them relatable and genuine, feeling like actual characters, not just bits of code put there to make you laugh. After exploring a bit, you fight Doggo. This encounter teaches you another layer of combat. If a projectile is blue, you'll take no damage if you aren't moving when it passes over you. It's a simple addition that's incorporated with some good jokes, but it'll prove to add more to combat than you might initially think. In this area, you can also take a piece of snow from a snowman at his request. Deeper into this snowy environment, Papyrus sees you, and he excitedly watches as you try and cross his puzzles. Much like the other games, I can appreciate how blatantly Undertale exerts its own gaminess. It also makes Papyrus a more likeable character, as he either solves his own puzzles and obstacles for you, or fails to get them to actually work. He really is harmless, and it makes his intentions and actions, which when you think about it are cruel, seems softer and, well, less death-inducing. You keep going, meeting NPCs, fighting bosses, solving puzzles, and playing a weird golf minigame. All of this comes to a head when Papyrus presents you with his random puzzle. This is a series of coloured squares with each colour having a different rule assigned to it. There's like 7 different rules which are all very conditional and confusing, and so by the end of the explanation you've already forgotten what was said at the beginning. I was worried about this because I expected this to be the moment of subversion. All these other puzzles had been lame or broken, but this time it was going to work and I was going to be fucked. And I was right. This was the moment of subversion, just not in the way I thought it would be. The game had conditioned me to expect how it would surprise me, and then taken advantage of what I thought was my own insight to truly do something unexpected. Undertale's subversion isn't shallow, it's self-aware and evolving. Another great facet of this moment is how the game makes the best of its presentation. It's a very simple looking game. Not bad looking, but certainly simple, and so you would think that conveying emotion visually would be hard. But that moment when Papyrus spins off screen in complete silence with a big, worried grin on his face after the random puzzle fails is so palpable. I know exactly how he's feeling, and all it took was some silence and a simple spinning animation. Not long after, you find yourself in Snowdin, the first town of the game. The one word you need to describe this place is lovely. The monsters are kind, goofy, and easy to like. The music is soothing and makes this freezing climate feel comfy, where you're not retreating into the buildings to escape the cold, but being invited in and embraced by them and their warmth. Each person you talk to has a distinct tone of voice, and what they say broadens your horizons when it comes to what monsters can be. You will learn the most from the store owner. If you walk into a store, you'll be met with a menu that has a large portrait of the store owner. You can't see yourself at all, and I think that's because you, the player, is the one interacting with this place. You can directly ask questions, and due to this essentially first-person view, the store owner is looking in your eyes, not the characters. I think this is another acknowledgement by the game that it is a game. It understands that buying and selling is a purely mechanical exchange. You're there to increase your stats and money, or to stock up on other goods for combat encounters. The questions you can ask certainly make sense if they were coming from your character, but the character never initiates dialogue in other circumstances, except combat. But that fact doesn't hurt my point, it reinforces it. Combat 2 has this almost first-person perspective, where the only part of your character you can see is your heart and soul. But maybe that isn't your character's heart and soul, maybe it's yours. See, the game makes a point of calling it your soul, so the damage you take isn't really physical, it's emotional and mental. When you die in a video game, you don't feel physical pain, you feel frustration, anger, disappointment, emotional things. And these two situations, combat and dialogue, are what gives the player the most power and control. That's where you really roleplay. In the overworld, you largely go along for the ride, almost always following a linear path. Now, I'm not saying that in combat or at shops your character isn't there, or you don't have any control in the overworld, as there are optional things to find. But Undertale appears to make a conscious decision to take away some of the layers between you and the game in situations where you can really roleplay. And in a game like this, one that looks to surprise you and make you rethink why you do the things you do in video games, that makes complete sense. The game's making sure you understand that what it says about the character you control, it also says about you. Oh boy, that was a tangent. So, to loop back before I got Kojima levels of verbose and pretentious, what can you actually learn from the Snowdin store? You learn that Sans and Papyrus just showed up in Snowdin one day, that the monsters used to confine themselves to the ruins, and that even with a magical barrier blocking their way to the surface, monsters still believe freedom is coming. It's refreshing to get a legitimate conversation, not just comedic banter that at times does feel a little try-hard, like the game is worried you'll stop playing if it doesn't make you laugh every 5 minutes. In the library you'll find a book that mentions monsters being much more dominated by emotion, better attuned to their souls than humans are. If a monster doesn't really want to fight, their attacks are weaker, and if a human is intent on killing them, those attacks will do more damage. It further explains the player's ability to spare all these monsters, and makes the monster's actions more forgivable. Not only are they confronted with a symbol of their imprisonment, but they're easily overtaken by their feelings. Undertale does a great job of presenting multiple reasons to make you understand that monsters aren't inherently bad, but have the ability to be bad and do bad things. As you leave Snowdin, you're surrounded by a thick fog and Papyrus's shadow lays before you. He explains his predicament of finding you, a human he likes, while also having the single-minded mission of killing humans. When Papyrus speaks of this, he does so as though he's not talking about you, but someone else. It is of course very obvious that he is talking about you, but this conversation is a great case study of Undertale's excellent characterization. Papyrus is goofy but sort of self-serious, dedicated but kind of incompetent, complex but immature. He's dealing with a pretty serious issue, questioning his beliefs and goals, grappling with who he thinks he should be and who he actually is. Papyrus is confronting this stuff while still not being mature enough to just talk to you about it. This over-the-top comedic character can still show depth and complexity because the game's framed this conversation within his characterization. Without this well-thought-out approach, the game's tone could easily set these characters up to be joke machines, not people you care about. As the conversation goes on, it appears that the layers are breaking down, that you're both aware of what he's doing and who he's really talking about. But then he flips it at the last second, insisting that you're the one feeling this way. It's funny, but a bit sad. He was so close to getting there, having the self-awareness to truly open his mind and consider himself, but he falters at the last second, and the facade goes back up. Papyrus overcompensates and fights you. This fight is fabulous. Initially he seems unsure, his attacks being no issue to avoid. In the act menu you can flirt and he insists you go on a date after he captures you. He's battling with the expectations he believes are put upon him. He believes he has to hate and capture humans because of the world he was brought up in, and he believes he must go on a date with you because that's what you want. He's lonely and insecure enough that he will hold on to two contradicting ideas while not even considering what he'd like to do. We've seen minute character arcs within the standard battles of the game, but a major one reveals itself here. After a few turns, flirting wasn't progressing the fight anymore, so I attack once. Papyrus sends out his blue attack, which he hypes up but can be avoided by just staying still, as we learnt before. But then, your heart turns blue and falls to the bottom of the box. Those same ground level bone attacks come back, but now you have to platform over them as the blue heart is affected by gravity. This is a brilliant moment, one that is funny enough that you don't care that it's unfair. It made me want to go back and see if I could avoid all the blue bones and stop from turning blue at all. I mean, I didn't do that, I got shit to do, but I wanted to. In one instant, the entire method and approach of fighting Papyrus completely shifts. It's basically a whole other combat style. No doubt one that is still true to the core of evading attacks, but different enough to feel fresh, and like the potential of the combat system is nowhere near being met. As you continue fighting, Papyrus struggles with his contradiction. With his actions he attacks you, tries to capture you, but with his words he's telling you how to better avoid the attacks, and pondering what to wear on the date. This dichotomy speaks to his upbringing. This reaction to humans was instilled into him, and has become muscle memory, second nature, but now he questions it, and uses his mind to examine it. Now he still does talk about becoming part of the Royal Guard by capturing you, but that shows that his mind isn't made up. He's still fighting with that too. He's just won it over more than he has his instincts and body. So he attacks with his actions and questions with his words. The fight isn't just subversive and engaging and exhilarating, it flawlessly weaves gameplay and narrative to create something that is satisfying on multiple levels. You overcome the small challenges of avoiding attacks and get the reward of learning more about Papyrus, understanding his plight. The attacks get harder and harder to avoid as they become more complex. The growth of the blue attacks I mentioned earlier comes into play here. Blue projectiles are weaved with white ones to change how you avoid attacks, stopping and starting, having to predict or understand how projectiles will move so that you don't set yourself up to get hit while you stay put. You start to feel on the back foot as you take more damage. Now, although I felt tense during the fight, I never felt stressed. The game's tone allows it to build this tension while not doing so by mounting too much pressure on the player. The culmination of the fight isn't just to do with gameplay, but story too. It helps that up to this point I never felt combat was unfair. I hadn't been given any reason to expect something unreasonable. But then there's Papyrus's final, deadly attack. Oh. I guess there isn't one. He instead just does a long normal attack until... Wait, oh shit, the dog's back. Okay, now it's just bone words. Oh, skateboarding bone. And then wait, how am I supposed to dodge that? What do you want me to do, to fucking fly or something? Oh. Okay, that was fucking cool. Papyrus almost concedes and spares you. After the fight, the fog clears and Papyrus chastises himself, saying Undyne, the leader of the Royal Guard, will be disappointed in him. The game gives you a choice, and you ask him to be friends. Papyrus lights up and gives you directions to the surface. During this encounter, Papyrus notably grows as a character, and we get to see it happen, and feel it happen thanks to gameplay. The game broke its own rules to defy your expectations and create a gripping experience, one totally unique to Undertale. Sans sits just inside the mouth of the cave ahead and asks if you want to go get some food with him. It's a great opportunity to see how other monsters interact with Sans, seeing as before this, the main cast don't feel tied to this location for much reason, so to see him be a member of this community dispels that. At Grillby's, Sans asks if you've heard of a talking flower. Papyrus has mentioned that one whispers things to him when he's alone. Flowey is influencing Papyrus. If you go around and talk to everyone after Sans leaves, you get new dialogue specifically about Sans. Much like Mother 3, you'll rarely see the same dialogue twice, creating characters that have actual opinions and feelings, ones that change as the circumstances around them do. After leaving Grillby's, you notice Papyrus outside his house, ready for your date. You go inside the house and can inspect everything there, with Papyrus providing commentary. You do the same inside his room, eventually talking to him. Then the date starts proper. Papyrus has snagged the date rulebook and you're in a pseudo-fight screen. Even doing something like a date, Papyrus feels there are rules and expectations to live up to, being self-conscious of his own ability. After following the date rulebook for a while, Papyrus confesses something. This is where you find out that he doesn't actually like you back. Knowing this puts the fight with him in perspective, where he was battling with expectations. Despite that, he doesn't get too dejected. He vows to keep being a really good friend, appearing to not be worried by his own perceived letting down of you. Seeing Papyrus evolve as a person over these first couple hours is really gratifying and feels like payoff for all the conversations he and Sans had with you. Deeper into the cave, you see Papyrus report to Undyne, leader of the Royal Guard. With Papyrus officially being a friend, the game does a great job of presenting Undyne as the real villain. Ominous music, casted in shadow, head to toe in armour so you get no indication of who they are. It's pretty effective. Papyrus fails to stand up for you, still pledging his allegiance to Undyne. This doesn't erase Papyrus's change in character, but shows that things rooted that deeply in you aren't simple things to remove. If anything, it made Papyrus more relatable. Continuing to traverse the cave, you run into a massive fan of Undyne's, clearly idolising them. You see as what happened to Papyrus is happening to this child, becoming numb to the concept of killing and hunting humans. Really, it mirrors us, how playing games growing up causes you not to question the act of killing in a video game. Undertale creates a world where killing you is normal, but implores you not to kill back. By presenting this scenario, it can call out our actions and make us consider them, as there's a clear mirror of what we've done in Undertale itself. In the cave you can find these echo flowers which repeat what was last spoken to them. This environment is the perfect backdrop for the tragedy that the echo flowers present, hearing the words of monsters who wish for freedom, who may no longer be alive. The music is sweeping, grand in its drama and despair. It's genuinely quite emotional, and made me think back to killing Toriel, forced me to think about what I'd done, even if it was by accident. The game does all this without actually saying it, mind you. No one walks up to you and asks why you'd kill, it just presents the moving parts to bring that realization and introspection out of you. You find some plaques divulging information about the war and the difference between humans and monsters. A human soul is much more powerful than a monster's, and as such they persist after death. This allows monsters to have the capacity to possess a human soul, making them very powerful. We've heard that the King Asgore is searching for human souls, so how powerful and evil must he be? This also justifies the player having the capacity to make it through the whole game, killing everything in sight, as your soul, which remember is what the heart in battle represents, is much stronger than that of monsters. Some really unique encounters with Undyne take place in the cave. She'll jump out and start attacking, in the overworld, not as an actual fight. The game's ability to consistently present new gameplay is impressive and makes the whole experience feel tremendously considered. This isn't quite one of those times though. In these instances, you're dodging projectiles or obstacles, combining timing with pattern reading and reaction speed. It's really not that different than facing an attack during a normal fight, but by presenting this threat in the overworld, it feels more threatening and dangerous. You understand that there's no fighting back here, escaping is simply the only option. At the end of the first appearance, Undyne mistakes the fan for you and attacks them. Despite that, the fan is still obsessive. Soon you cross over into an area known as Waterfall. You see more echo flowers and hear more conversations. This area exceeds in brevity. You aren't interrupted constantly, you're just given a chance to look around, engage with the echo flowers and take in the atmosphere. The game's tone of voice can make it hard to hang on to ambience very long, and so getting some here is really appreciated. This is taken advantage of as the game uses this opportunity to elaborate on the war. It wasn't a war per se, more a massacre. There's another high-octane encounter with Undyne, ending with you falling off a bridge and into the darkness below. You wake up on a bed of flowers, similar in likeness to Flowey. The area is covered in garbage, providing insight as to how monsters and humans are similar, as you find things like food and anime DVDs among it all. Moving forward, you come across Napster Blook's house. When you enter, there's this plucky music playing. You can choose to lie down and relax with him, and if you do, a spacey ambient track plays as the world around you fades away. Napster Blook seems simple on the surface, but they have the capacity to consider, think outside themselves and explore something more. The way the game explores different characters in completely unique ways allows each character to stand out really well, and Napster Blook is an example of that. Around here another storefront can be found. You can ask Gerson about an emblem sitting over his shoulder. It's the Deltarune, the emblem of the Monster Kingdom. The triangles represent the monsters, with the meaning of the winged orb being contentious. Some believe it's an angel from the prophecy, sent to liberate the monsters. Some believe it to be an angel of death. The answer depends on the player. On a pacifist route, you are the liberating angel. On a violent one, harbinger of death. From what Gerson and others have said, the king is well liked, talked about as an incredibly kind person. A kind person who wants your soul. Exploring ahead, more plaques are found. Only someone with a powerful soul can exit the barrier, but someone with the strength equivalent to 7 human souls could destroy it for good. The king is looking for these human souls to free his people. As you explore, you're interrupted by Undyne again. You have your back to a wall as they approach to attack, but before they can, their biggest fan jumps out, excited to meet them. Undyne drags the fan away, allowing you to flee around the corner and onto another precarious bridge. The fan calls out to you, now understanding you're human. The kid tries to muster up some malice towards you, but comes up empty. As they run off, they slip, barely gripping the bridge. You have the option to save them as Undyne appears. You decide to take it. The child stands up for you, causing Undyne to retreat. The fan says you're friends and runs off, not tripping. Every other encounter up to this point ends with them running off screen and tripping, excluding this one. If we once again compare the fan with Papyrus, I believe we find an explanation. The fan is a child. They haven't had all that extra time to dig their heels into their beliefs. Where Papyrus tries to do both, hunt humans and be your friend, the fan seems to accept that you aren't an enemy under any circumstance. The fan hasn't undergone the extra years of telling themselves they're right. Because of this, when faced with you, they are able to unlearn their behaviour easier than Papyrus, so the fan runs off with confidence, no longer tripping. You cross the bridge and are intercepted by Undyne again. They mention that Asgore needs only one more soul to break the barrier, and Undyne is intent in providing it. Undyne removes her helmet as some fantastic music plays, and it's hard not to root for her honestly, especially as seeing her face makes her less menacing. It's a super fun moment. She gives a speech saying that I remorselessly kill everything in my path, that I did it because it was easy and fun. This would be such a landmark part of the playthrough if she wasn't wrong. The game appears to only check if you've killed anything, not how much you have actually killed. So in my case, Undyne goes on this rant while I've only killed one monster, and it caused me to vow not to kill. Now, killing Toriel was certainly a horrible thing to do, but Undyne's language is harsh. The game really commits to confronting the player, while not taking appropriate measures to ensure that this will actually track for a player's run so far. In a game that allows you to make decisions that it will later call out, small inconsistencies like this really stick out, breaking the illusion in a sense. After her speech, Undyne attacks. Undyne turns your soul green, changing its state. You can't run from a battle in this state, and instead of moving, you have to play a sort of rhythm game, blocking each of these arrows in a pattern. The game is kind in how it ramps the attacks up, really easing you in. It doesn't feel too easy though. The music pulses along with a repetitive, unstoppable pace, making you forget how polite Undertale is actually being here. She'll turn the heart red again in an attempt to catch you with an off-guard attack, which leaves you with the opportunity to run away. I was so into the fight that I didn't even think about it at first. In fact, I died after 10 minutes, not having even figured it out. It's a testament to how engrossing and bored in I was, and also to how goddamn stupid I am. Even in the second attempt, it took me like 5 or 6 minutes to finally think of it. Once you do run, she'll chase you and will inevitably catch up. As you continue fleeing, you'll enter Hotland, the next area, as Papyrus interrupts by calling, suggesting that you, him, and Undyne should hang out sometime. Undyne's armor becomes her undoing under the sweltering heat as she passes out. Conveniently, there's a water cooler right there, so you have the choice of giving her some. After cooling down, she shambles out back to Waterfall, with you having saved her life. She seems like she could be changing. Undyne had you standing right before her, defenseless, but she walked off instead. You're immediately greeted with a lab. There's a massive screen with your face on it. It's been following your every move, it seems. A scientist, Alphys, is surprised to see you in there. She's the royal scientist, and she tells you that as she watched you, she couldn't help but root for you. Alphys wants to help you through Hotland with her knowledge. At this point, it's obvious some monsters can be trusted, and Alphys is incredibly lovable, and doesn't seem like she could do any harm, at least not without apologising while it happens. But she isn't all helpful. Her robot, which is being calibrated to kill humans, is on the loose. As she explains this, Mettaton crashes through the wall of the lab. The rules are broken yet again, as this fight is actually a quiz show. Mettaton asks progressively more obtuse questions, but you can look to Alphys, who's making the answer with her hands, somehow knowing the solutions. What continued to blow me away as I played Undertale was the sheer creativity. The game never settles for being itself, establishing rules only to break them, but only in compelling, fun ways. As you're presented with these new concepts, they rarely feel forced or contrived. The world has been established as being absurd and strange, and the game has established itself as purposely subverting the assumed rules of video games, so that each time you have to run away from a boss instead of killing it, or cheat on a quiz show to avoid death, you're open to it. Undertale opens you up to the idea of it constantly changing and evolving, but doesn't cause you to predict how it will evolve and change. The characterization of this encounter is also great. Mettaton clearly gets frustrated with you for answering correctly, but refuses to let the game show host Facade slip. Alphys can't help but interrupt when a question about her favourite show comes up, leading to Mettaton asking who Alphys has a crush on. She looks around nervously while Mettaton stops the timer for this one question, clearly getting revenge for Alphys telling you the answers. The fight ends with Mettaton rocketing off, and you completely understand the personality of two new characters. Alphys gives you a new phone which allows you to access item storage from wherever. I haven't leveled up once since the Toriel fight, yet I've still felt character growth thanks to finding better gear and getting quality of life changes like the new phone. Even without that though, Undertale would still feel rewarding to play, because the biggest facilitator of character growth is the game world. This completely alien place now feels more familiar and personable. I want to learn more. You leave the lab and venture out into the hot atmosphere of Hotland. Did I seriously write that? God damn, what a vivid sentence that is. As you go, you'll get interrupted by Alphys' status updates on social media, which clue you into a few things. First, she's very cute. but more importantly, she knows exactly what traps are ahead and can in some cases disable them. This does make sense. Maybe she set the traps and puzzles, but it does make you suspicious, especially when you remember that she knew all the answers to Mettaton's ridiculous questions. The puzzles you do face aren't all that interesting. The jump panels don't really add much and feel redundant, not including a few down the road which are more complex, but they don't require all the previous ones to make them feasible to complete. Then there's the social media interruptions. I just said they're cute, and they are, but the game prioritizes trying to make you laugh over letting you solve puzzles and face challenges. The best example is this bit where you have to push 3 switches as you go past to disable a barrier. Right as you go to press the third one though, Alphys interrupts, causing you to miss it, so she just disables the barrier for you. Now it's not even a hard obstacle, and it wouldn't feel that rewarding to do by yourself. But by this point you've been getting interrupted like every 15 to 30 seconds. I just wanted the game to let me play it for a bit. If a phone popped up in a corner of the screen with these updates and you could read them as you walked, it would completely fix this problem. But the game is convinced you want to stop and read all this text, and though it's almost always right in its predictions of the player's behaviour, in this instance there's a disconnect. This moment does make me understand why someone wouldn't like Undertale though. If you just want to play a game, I could very easily see how the characters would seem obnoxious, how the gameplay would feel inconsistent, and how the game could come across as very proud of itself to create a bad impression. So, to jump back a bit, you eventually walk onto the set of a Mettaton cooking show with another entertaining, unique sequence playing out. As you leave the set, the core comes into view. The music is thumping and buzzing around, and the core's silhouette waves under the heat. Now before I said this world was feeling more personable, but it does so on a personal level. It legitimately puts pressure on you as you realise that you may know some people, but the core and the king who wants you dead is ultimately unknown. And then like 15 seconds later, the goofy music and sounds come back. The game just makes sure you get nervous for what's ahead, and then comes back in to entertain you. Throughout all of Hotland, you're regularly facing new monsters and having to dodge new attacks while learning about said monsters as people. These encounters aren't constant though. In fact, as I played, the low encounter rate made each time I was sprung with a battle a surprise. The encounters are random, but are also sparse enough that they never feel that way. The placement of each one felt purposeful and considered. It's pretty amazing that a game with random encounters managed to give that impression, and speaks to the game's restraint. Soon after making these 2 knights confess their love to each other, you play another Mettaton minigame, this time disarming bombs. Looking back at all these minigames and unique encounters, they all still revolve around timing-based and evasive challenges. I mentioned how vastly creative the game is, but it's actually creative within its own limits. I only realised this because the game contextualises all these encounters differently, so that the gameplay itself never feels muddy or inconsistent, like what I mentioned with the Undyne encounters. You never feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again, even though you really are. At this point it seems like Alphys knows exactly what is going on, but would rather let you sweat before disarming all the threats, making it seem like she's saving you. Once you pass into the more mechanical part of Hotland, Alphys makes herself vulnerable, asking if you want to watch TV together sometime, saying you should add her on social media. You realise that Alphys is so used to understanding people through a screen that maybe she's been saving you from the precarious situations she puts you in so that you'll want to be friends with her, because she doesn't think you would otherwise. Looking at the major characters, you can see why the game was so popular online. People like Alphys, Papyrus, Sans, Snapsterbook, they're all so relatable, but not just relatable in the sense of, oh, they're insecure and don't know how to feel. They're relatable in the, I grew up constantly consuming media and eventually internet media to the point where I try and pass all social interactions through that filter and set of rules. This has made me so self-deprecating and down so many layers of irony that I can no longer tell what I actually like and what I just think I like. Not that I feel like that. I'm making feature-length YouTube videos about video games because I'm incredibly well adjusted. So these characters are specifically relatable to internet audiences, to the people who tend to engage with video games at the most passionate level. So everyone who would relate to these characters does, in a way you don't come across often. And burying these characters in a video game built to make you play it differently than anything else is really smart, because when you see yourself so closely in the monsters of a game, of course you're going to try and save them. The next boss fight in Hotland is against Muffet the Spider. The gimmick here is that you're connected to these threads, having to bounce between them to avoid spiders. It's a cool fight, and when trying to think of what to compare it to, only one thing came to mind. But only the concept came to mind, not where I saw the concept, so I'll attempt to explain it. It's pretty simple. You have these 3 lanes with paths in between them. The enemy will travel down a lane, switching as it meets the in-between paths. So you have to predict which lane they'll end up in. I think this is a pretty common concept. So sometimes you just have to avoid them, sometimes you have to place the in-between paths to take them to a certain spot, and I'm sure there's a shitload of other variations. But the important thing is that this is usually visualized, at least from what I remember, using spiders. So the lanes and paths are webs and you have to avoid them or whatever. And so you have this Undertale boss fight that references back to this typically spider-themed minigame, and the boss fight is against a spider, where you have to avoid the other spiders, with you being the one confined to these lanes. Another subversion, I think, at least. The connection is kind of tenuous and I'm not convinced that I didn't just make this all up, but I swear I've seen it before, and if any game is going to flip that idea on its head, it's this one. Also, the music is so good, it's densely layered and has this sort of sickly sweet sensation with how high-pitched all the different melodies are. After sparing her, you're sung to by Mettaton over what is essentially a Final Fantasy song before getting dropped into the dungeon below. In the dungeon, you're faced with a random puzzle again. You think it'll simply fail once more, but you actually have to do it. Here we see Undertale not just subverting other games, but itself. It sets up the random puzzle as failing after building it up, so when Mettaton realizes you know the rules from earlier on, you don't sweat it because you're not actually going to have to do it. But then you do, and you're just randomly walking around hoping in vain that you'll somehow get to the end. But the squares just keep going on, so you keep panicking and the walls of the fire enclose around you until Alpha switches them off, very obviously staging this to save you. And when this happened, I felt like an idiot, because Undertale is kind. At times it teases you, like in this instant, but ultimately it wants you to keep playing, so it stretches the world around your ability, never revealing the limits so that you never feel completely safe from danger. After this you fight Mettaton, although it's another clear attempt by Alphys to make you feel cool. She feels more confident and self-assured having guided you through Hotland, and it's hard not to be grateful that you could play a part in her growth as a person. Just a bit further ahead you find yourself at the MTT Resort. From some store owners you find out that Alphys hasn't seemed to do anything after becoming the royal scientist, and that she used to be close to the store owners themselves. Sans is outside the hotel and you go to have dinner with him. He asks if what you have to do is worth it to get home, and tells you a story. He found a massive locked door near a sentry station at Snowdin, and so began practicing knock-knock jokes. One day he gets a response and makes a habit of telling them back and forth with whoever's behind the door. Now when Sans speaks from this perspective, his voice changes. And these voice changes are essentially another method of characterization. In fact, text in general is. These little snippets obviously cause you to form a connection between the people and their voices, another part of them for you to know. Sans's is kind of casual, not as immediate as, say, Mettaton's. Because Mettaton's a robot, their speech is precise and exact, executed by algorithms and programs. And then the font. The font used for Sans has slightly rounded corners, again more casual and informal, with Mettaton using all caps and a font with sharper corners. And finally, the scrolling of this text. When talking to Sans, it comes as you'd expect, one letter after another, but when talking to Mettaton, it appears in chunks, feeling appropriately more robotic. There's plenty of changes for main characters, and it's a respect and attention to detail that few other games possess. But back to the Sans story. Soon the two are reciting jokes to each other and it becomes a habit. One day this person asks Sans to look after a human, should one come through here. So he did, but he says that if he hadn't made that promise, you'd be dead where you stand. He says he's joking, but you kind of know he's not. I actually think this moment, which should be memorable, is a bit lame. The music cuts out, the text scrolls slowly, betraying the character-specific text quirks I just mentioned to make it stand out more, and the little character portrait of Sans has no eyes. It's like something out of a creepypasta. I say that because Sans has been so firmly established as a goofy, uncaring guy that this sudden shift feels like a kid trying to make him edgy and scary. He's just so dumb. I mean, he's a skeleton who constantly makes shitty jokes while perpetually having his hands shoved into the pockets of his hoodie. I'm sorry, you cannot take that image and make it scary just by omitting a few pixels in the music. Maybe that's the intent, to make it seem goofy, but I don't get the impression it is. As you digest this moment though, you realise who he's talking about. It's Toriel. We've seen her journal filled with bad jokes from when we were there at the start of the game, and now maybe Sans is right. If I have to kill someone like Toriel to get home, is it worth it? I've found friends here. I don't know if the character you play as has other friends, family, or what their home is actually like. The game actually makes you question the whole quest objective, which proves its ability when it comes to making the player have some level of introspection about their decisions and feelings within the game. In the lobby of the MTT Resort is an elevator to the capital of the Underground, which is currently out of service. This reveals something I don't like about the game's world. As you progress, things seem to happen spontaneously and conveniently, to the point where it can feel like the world doesn't extend very far past your fingertips. Like if you reached out, there would be nothing there, breaking the illusion and making you realise that this is just a game. I only got this impression in parts though. When it talked of the monster's history, I couldn't believe it because it's so far in the past. I don't expect to see it. But it mentions the capital a couple times, and it reminds you that you're only seeing a small part of the Underground. And knowing that there's a lot more to see while not getting a glimpse of it, breaks the illusion, as I said. It's not a major concern, I still cared for the world and monsters, but it sticks out more when it otherwise manages to make a place so absurd feel so real. Entering the core has a sense of finality to it. This is what you've been staring at on the horizon, and it delivers on its reputation. It's a culmination of previous challenges, to the point where you fight new versions of the first monsters in the game, while also presenting new monsters and moves to dodge. These remixes of old monsters, Final Frogget and Whimsalot, require new actions to be spared. They have to be reached almost, by admiring or consoling them, as though they are literally hardened versions of themselves, more violent and less emotionally available. Leaving this first part of the core, you're met with Mettaton, who tells you that Alphys has been trying to insert herself into the story by creating obstacles and such. Alphys has planned to jump in and save you while you fight Mettaton, but they have other ideas. They lock you in the room with them, and the fight starts. Your heart is yellow in this fight, essentially turning it into the ship of a shmup. After a call from Alphys, you learn to turn Mettaton around and flip the switch to off. This only causes Mettaton to reveal their final, fabulous form. You now have a ratings chart and have to choose actions that will increase the ratings the most. For example, boasting that you won't get hurt and then making it through Mettaton's next turn unscathed will raise ratings. But boasting and then taking damage will lower ratings, as you've disappointed the audience. This is a pretty tough fight as you're facing truly unique challenges. It sticks to the spirit of evading, but you now have another variable, the ability to shoot objects. So these objects have reactions, and suddenly there's more possibilities and complexity to the fight. But losing a few times isn't bad. It allowed me to use the actions to their full potential. With better knowledge of attacks I could boast, more confident that I wouldn't get hit. This new system also adds way more strategy than other fights. You have to make note of the past, present and future. If you've gone a couple turns without taking damage, it's a good time to heal turn, and then you can use that higher health from not getting hit to tank some hits and satisfy the audience by letting them see the new villain get their immediate comeuppance. So in the heat of this intense battle with already more to account for, you have to try and remember what you just did, what you're doing now, and what you're going to do next. The game acknowledges this, with Mettaton having an attack where you have to shoot obstacles, and remember which ones you shot as it's rewinded, having to dodge all over again. On top of all this, while deciding what to do during your turn, ratings keep decreasing. So this battle has this super intense music, a constant reminder of your performance so far, the need to remember all Mettaton's attacks and your decisions, and finally this fantastic sense of urgency, as you never feel you can stop, forcing choices to be made basically on instinct. It's just so much fun. It's completely engrossing and energizing, and I know I've said this word so many times, but unique. It's astonishing how completely the game can balance old and new to feel fresh but familiar. and with this fight having a sort of learning curve, it's so satisfying. Throughout the fight you get opportunities to shoot Mettaton's heart, breaking their new body apart. And the music, oh my god, it never settles, always changing, letting you catch onto a tune, hum along a bit and then listen to a new one. The way I've written about this boss fight probably feels scattered and a bit sloppy, but that's how it was playing, constantly being pleased and shocked that something new was happening. It's probably some of the most raw fun I've had in a boss fight in any game. Mettaton as a boss isn't frustrating or despicable, we've been endeared to them through cooking shows, the news, literal song. When it comes to the gameplay of Undertale, this fight is the shining representation of the neutral run. Now saying this, I must acknowledge that I had probably the ideal experience of this fight. After losing a few times and getting my head around the quirks of the fight, I started to make some real progress. I was also taking a lot of damage and as I got Mettaton to their last phase, I had very little health left. I took a risk and attacked instead of healing and made it through with 1 health. After striking a dramatic pose, there were over 11,000 viewers and some of them started calling in. They love the show and, more importantly, Mettaton. Mettaton realizes that maybe they should stay in the underground and you can go through the barrier. Seeing this arc take place is so satisfying, and having this arc play out thanks to your continued interaction makes it that much more meaningful. The pure amount of heart and soul that Undertale possesses, and the game's ability to give you the power to dish out that heart and soul, is part of what makes it so much fun to experience, and is why it's such a great RPG specifically. So I got this super intense fight that was right down to the wire, only for it to be turned around because Mettaton realizes their value to the people of the underground. Looking back over the fight, I realized just how generous the game was being. I had 5 health at the beginning of the last turn. I swiftly took a hit and lost 2 damage. I got hit 2 more times, but they only damaged me for 1 HP each. The game understands the tension and desperation of this moment, and so lowers the power of Mettaton's attacks for the sake of preserving said tension. But I didn't feel cheated or babied. It felt like the game was actively making sure I was ultimately getting the most dramatic, memorable moment out of it. It felt like part of the reward for treating the vast majority with peace. During this fight, it stuck out to me just how effective the little combat box is. It provides hard limits for your movement and focus. To dodge attacks, you really only need to pay attention to that box, and it's so small that keeping everything in your periphery is pretty easy and causes you to take note of projectiles without really meaning to. You walk on to the end of the core, but before you can leave, Alphys catches up with you. She admits to lying, that she wasn't telling the truth when she said a human soul was strong enough to cross the barrier. You also need a monster's soul. We know that monsters' souls don't hang around, so the only way to cross would be to kill Asgore. Some characters have said he's kind, but he's also on the relentless search for human souls. You enter the castle, and interestingly, when saving just inside the entrance, you get no determination message. Further into the castle you come across a place that's identical to Toriel's. A similarly acoustic song is playing, and the save point out front is called New Home, a mirror to the one outside Toriel's which was simply called Home. This new home is completely saturated of all colour, save for the golden flowers, sharing likeness with Flowey. The flowers at Toriel's were much more muted and in some cases dead. These two places harbour lifelessness, but in contrasting ways. But these contrasting elements, colour and flowers, both represent life. A flower is a being, something that is literally alive, and we describe something colourful as full of life. It's clear Asgore and Toriel had some connection, whether friends, family or lovers I'm not sure, but without one, the other loses some of the life in their home. Walking throughout Asgore's home, monsters interrupt you. They tell a story of a human falling into the underground. The king's son, Asriel, hears the human call out and helps them, bringing them back to the castle. Eventually the human became a part of the family, treated as a child and sibling. This brought hope in the hearts of the underground, wishing for unity and peace between humans and monsters. Soon the human became sick, their last wish being to see the flowers from their village. Just a day later, the human died. With the power of his unbridled grief, Asriel absorbed the human's soul, becoming incredibly powerful. Asriel crossed the barrier with his newfound power and laid the human on a bed of golden flowers at the centre of the village. The humans, seeing Asriel and the dead body, assumed he killed them and attacked. Asriel didn't retaliate and ventured back home. He collapsed in the castle and his dust spread through the garden. Having lost 2 children at once, the king, queen and other monsters fell into despair. Thus began Asgore's plan to kill any human who entered the underground, using their souls to break the barrier and free the monsters. The regular monsters relay this story and speak of the barrier's destruction with hope and joy. They don't see your death as a loss of life, but as their own emancipation. I emphasize the story being told by normal monsters because this decision does something that other RPGs don't. The grunts of a villain's army usually feel like fodder, there for combat and nothing more. You rarely get a sense of if they believe in the villain's plan or if they're there out of circumstance. But by having the same monsters you've been turning peaceful the whole game communicate this tale, it tells you that they truly see their freedom lying at the end of this plan. It fleshes them out more than most other games and gives you a good idea of this world's overall opinions and feelings, making it feel real and, by extension, somewhat understandable. You travel throughout the castle as this story is told, and after its conclusion find yourself in the last corridor, bathed in light and casting silhouettes. It feels final and grandiose in an understated, dramatic way, and the fact that a game that looks like Undertale managed to pull off moody lighting is seriously impressive. Sans stands further down the corridor. Bells ring out as he talks, now lacking the distinctive voice and font. He judges you for your level. You see, EXP stands for execution points. Love, abbreviated to LV, stands for level of violence. Every kill you make extends your level of violence, and by numbering and turning those things into stats, it makes them easier to contend with. As you keep killing, you can distance yourself from it, seeing it purely as a way to get the numbers up, with it becoming easier as your love and EXP increase. This explanation is not just related to Undertale, but most RPGs. Assigning stats and exact numbers to characters is a way of implementing mechanics, and most RPGs have a mechanical core built around combat or violence. So they numb you to the act of killing by rewarding you for that violence. It becomes easier because the game says it's okay, because you improve at killing, and because your stats increased, making you literally more powerful. Sans asks that you look inward, which the game gives you time to do, by the way, and asks if you've done the right thing. After you have, he's back with his character portrait, font and voice, hoping that no matter the answer, you were at least honest. Sans leaves you with this introspection, and the power to control the monster's future. This moment is the ultimate statement of Undertale, I think. Its focus on non-violence and subversion culminates here. Because Sans is not talking to our character, he, as the author, is talking to us. He's talking to video games as a medium. This isn't a criticism or confrontation or shaming of creators and players, but a question. Shouldn't we look for another way? Why don't we try and push video games to live outside of a violent power fantasy? Why don't we create narratives that could only exist in video games? And why don't players try and really think while they play a game, questioning their own decisions? And again, this isn't a condemnation, because no matter what we find when we look back on our playing or creating of games, as long as we stop now to consider it, think about it, and maybe approach it differently next time, then that would be great. That's all that's being asked of you and me. By saying this, Undertale actually becomes a celebration of gaming. It has the respect to challenge all who are a part of it, to help it to continue progressing and growing. It speaks its statement as a question to make it feel heartfelt and honest instead of blunt and elitist. And it asks this question with compassion in its voice, loving what video games are but looking forward to what they will be, and I think it's brilliant. Now, it's not a sweeping analysis of this obsession with violence and power we see in video games, of course. I think it's making a broad, general statement, more speaking to trends than specific players or video games themselves. But it is a more thorough, effective and well-executed questioning of video gaming than all others I've seen before. So, as a player, what did it do to me? Well, personally I've specifically searched out and played games that allow for a non-violent experience in the past few years, so I didn't feel guilt exactly, but it did make me ask, why aren't more games like Undertale? No doubt it's fun to shoot things, but why are we constantly pursuing some sense of mainstream acceptance that games are a legitimate form of storytelling, while focusing what truly makes video games unique, interaction, almost purely around violence? The big blockbuster games that are supposed to be great narratives just can't seem to give up their obsession with constant extreme violence and death. They never actually treat games as this legitimate storytelling medium because the narrative elements are so far removed from the gameplay elements. The narrative potential of video games lies in their interactivity, the ability to forge more personal, connected relationships with characters and worlds, and then changing those worlds and relationships with your own actions. That's why games like Undertale and Gone Home are better as narrative and character-driven games. The narrative is directly improved by and enhanced thanks to your interaction with it, while Naughty Dog games are trying to make you feel bad for killing after it's crafted tons of unique execution animations that make you feel really cool for doing that same killing. Again, this is general, and this is just what Undertale made me think, so I'm not saying that Undertale as a game thinks this, just to clarify. But the fact that a video game has made me examine its own industry to this extent is kind of amazing. So that's what this grand moment of Undertale did for me, on one level. Because while this is all super unique and thoughtful, this same scene has further significance, as it's asking about our decisions not just in all games, but also this one specifically. This is another crucial point of this section's success, because it doesn't come out of nowhere. Undertale's world has been built around this ability to kill or spare, so it can ask this big question while still making sense on its own level, within its own world. And on that level, I felt like shit. Because I regretted killing Toriel so much. She was the most outwardly kind and loving and accommodating character in the game, but she was the only one to die. Okay, and maybe this is a reach, but if you remember, I killed her because I believed it was a scripted fight like in so many other games. Thanks to the failure of other games to respect a player's agency and interaction, it caused Toriel to die here. In a scripted fight, you don't have control. It's going to end when it wants to, not when you cause it to. So perhaps this is some weaving of the two levels of Undertale's commentary. The lack of unique storytelling questioned on one level of the commentary led to the assumed violence that's called out on the other level of the commentary. Like I said, maybe a reach, but in my case specifically, I think it holds up, even if it wasn't intended. Now having said all this, that wasn't the end, even though it kinda feels like it. We've still got to confront Asgore and complete the story of this world. If you pass the throne room and instead head down the hallway, you can enter a room lined with coffins containing the other human souls. One is empty, with your name engraved on it. The throne room itself is covered with vegetation, and most notably, a large patch of golden flowers. Asgore is watering the flowers and... oh man, he is not a villain. Your first introduction is him sustaining and supporting life, the life of his child's favourite flower, a child he adopted. Throughout the game you get this sort of conflicting messaging. Monsters say he's nice, yet he's killed 6 humans before you and plans to lead you to the same fate. But when you meet him here, you do so with more context, more understanding. When he turns to you and recognises who you are, I was kinda hit with a revelation. I knew him and Toriel had some relationship and he was the king, so it should have been obvious, but right then, seeing his face, it hit me. She was the queen, and I'd killed her. The music in particular is so perfect. It rings out, filled with silence, to leave you with your thoughts and emotions a moment, only to ring out again, restarting the process. It's like this noise that happens in the background, because you're too consumed with what's happening in front of your eyes. And the worst part of it all is, he's so nice. His eyes are gentle and kind, he speaks with enthusiasm, and he's such a dad. He leaves, giving you time to prepare for what must happen. One throne sits in the centre of the room, and another lies in the corner, covered with a sheet. Something seemed to happen to make him and Toriel separate, but he's clearly not over it. The next room mirrors the first of the game, but without the golden flowers, without the life. You leave this room and come face to face with the barrier. It stretches infinitely as this distorted wind echoes around you. It moves in and out like it's breathing. Visually, it sits in stark contrast to all the other environments, being vague and, in a sense, incomprehensible. It's so monolithic that it's intimidating, and the task of tearing it down would feel impossible, all in vain. The fight starts, although it doesn't seem appropriate to call it that. You're filled with determination one last time. Asgore's first action is to destroy the mercy button. This will end with one of you dead. I'd been locked out of the pacifist option. But I refused to accept that. My first attempt I just kept trying to talk, hoping that maybe if I tried enough he'd open up, but he doesn't. I think the reason killing Toriel weighed so heavy on me was because she was all I killed. It's vivid because the immediate regret and shock was individual throughout my playthrough. There are plenty of games which try and have sympathetic villains, and some succeed, but none as much as Undertale. These are two people who don't hate each other, but who have best interests that inherently clash, forcing them to fight. I never felt any malice for Asgore, and I never sensed any from him. We were just two people with a goal, and the only option each of us could see to make it there involved killing the other. As far as gameplay goes, Asgore has brilliant attacks. Some are similar to Toriel's, being based around fire magic, another example of gameplay and story interacting. But Asgore's are bigger and more deadly, possibly because Toriel was always holding back in that fight. What's so great about Asgore's attacks is how tight they are. You always feel like you're only just dodging every time, and it keeps the tension razor sharp. The game's ability overall to craft micro challenges that can be overcome by the player is staggering. You feel good at the game, but never too good. The best attack of his though is the eye flashes. He'll fade into darkness with his eyes flashing a sequence of blue and orange. He then uses his weapon to swipe, with the order of his eyes flashing determining when you should move or stand still. It has two phases essentially, the build up where you have to observe his eyes, and then the payoff where you have to actually make the dodges. It's this tiny little journey each time, and getting it right is super satisfying. Oh, and the music is so good. The way the soundtrack blends sounds that are blatantly synthetic and those that aren't adds so much. Those retro-inspired sounds give the game heart and charm, and the modern, at times kind of orchestral sounds capitalise on that charm to create a large, important atmosphere, making those moments have weight, with it working to full effect here. Throughout this whole intense process, Asgore never talks. And with how I stressed the importance of these mid-combat character arcs, you'd think it would happen again here, but that's ultimately for the better. Asgore is a violent person, he doesn't want to hurt you, so I think, like Toriel, he gets through it by shielding himself, putting some of that distance that Sans mentioned between you. This causes his silence to actually flesh out his character, show his dedication, his ultimately kind nature, and demonstrate just how effective that distance can be. So Asgore's health is getting a bit low, so you go for another attack and you've defeated him. At this point, Asgore opens up. When his son died, the monster's hope died with it, but after Asgore declared that he would kill any human who entered the underground, to eventually break the barrier, that hope returned. Toriel, however, was disgusted, leaving to try and take care of humans before they left the ruins, trying to save them. Asgore didn't want power, but he wanted his people to have hope. Now though, he'd just like to see his wife and child. You have the choice to kill or spare him. I mean, it isn't really a choice, because it's obvious the correct answer is mercy, and anyone who did otherwise is completely heartless, but it's nice of the game to act like you could choose to kill him. Asgore says him and Toriel will take care of you as long as you stay in the underground, and oh god, I wanted to die. How could I tell this man that I killed his wife? So I was honestly a little relieved when Flowey killed him. Not really, of course, I almost fucking cried. The fact that I was that invested in both Toriel and Asgore after spending not even an hour with each of them is a testament to how amazing the characters are, and honestly that's applied to everyone in the game, even the monsters. Flowey absorbs the human souls and repeats, it's kill or be killed. The screen fades to white and then... What? Ah, fuck, I didn't get to save! Am I really gonna have to do the whole Asgore fight again? My emotions can't handle that, man. Ah, shit. Okay, I'll reopen it, just do it again, I suppose. Oh. The game didn't crash. Flowey closed it. A save point can be found in this black void, but Flowey smashes through the save screen, a representation of the game, and is now addressing you, the player. Obviously this is an RPG, all the characters are technically addressing you, but before it was the character of me, the sprite on the screen, but now it feels like me, like the meat space me. This is backed up when Flowey says your save has been erased, and he's gonna make you relive this moment over and over by respawning you at it. What happens next is so bonkers that it's kinda hard to explain. Flowey transforms into a grotesque mix of human, plant and machine. Most importantly, he breaks the visual style of the rest of the game. The simple graphics were cute and endearing, but they feel like a framework, in place to make this moment as impactful as it is. Flowey is literally unlike anything else in this world. So much of it was random, seemingly nonsensical, but it was always tied together by the art style. Flowey isn't, because Flowey is more. You're immediately faced with a barrage of attacks with no option to fight back, and when you do get one, it does like 1 point of damage. I died like 20 seconds in, and Flowey has taken over the game over screen as well. He's inescapable. This is how to create an ending. It really feels like the game as a piece of software is being mangled, and that once you're done with it, it won't actually be playable anymore, giving a stronger sense of finality than I've really ever seen before. Flowey crashes your game again, and at relaunch you're back fighting him. What's so clever about this is that when you really look at it, the game is still being kind. It's giving you a checkpoint right before the fight so you lose no progress, but it can hide that behind Flowey wanting to kill you again and again, so it can hold up the tone it's just established while respecting the player's experience. I very quickly die again, but was greeted with new text once I launched. It really makes it feel like Flowey knows what's happening and is responding to it, reinforcing him as being completely rogue and going against the game's intention. Making it further this time, you're eventually thrown into this void, having to dodge obstacles. If you manage to act, then they all turn into healing items. One of the human souls is assisting you, preparing you for the next challenge. It's heartwarming knowing that even in this fucked up situation you're still getting support, that love and kindness can still shine through. The fight continues in this loop, doing more damage and dodging new attacks while having interludes for the 6 human souls. The attacks themselves are so overwhelming and quick that you never really get a consistent read of the pattern, and the regular barrage of new attacks makes it seem like Flowey is evolving, becoming more powerful or just cooking up new ways to hurt you. After 6 interludes, the souls heal you together, rebelling against Flowey. This drops Flowey's defense to 0 and makes his attacks more reasonable. You can't die at this point, but I was so bored in that I still collected healing items. After a few minutes of attacking, Flowey is finally defeated, until he reloads file 3. Now he kills you instantly, reloading and killing over and over. Eventually the souls use their overwhelming power to stop Flowey. One way the souls help here is by turning the white pellets into healing items. This is exactly how Flowey tricked you in the beginning. His example as to why the world was kill or be killed. But in that first instance, Toriel saved you, and in this one, the souls. Despite how much Flowey has tried to prove that the world is cruel, he's actually failed to do so. Even when he became a god and made his sole purpose torturing you, there was still a way to turn it around, thanks to support and love. Undertale subverts everything it can, but never its message of believing there are always good people, and even among those who we're told are our enemies. I think this shows integrity in that Undertale doesn't try to be different for the sake of it, but to create something wholly unique, which it certainly succeeds in doing. Your soul sits in a void, filled with this empty noise that's similar to that of the barrier. Flowey sits in front of you, slumped over, and you're given the choice to kill or spare. Flowey can't understand why you'd spare him, threatening to kill everyone if you let him live. He says he hasn't learned his lesson, but he has. He recognises what he's done, and hates himself for it to the point where he believes he should die for it. His threats are encouragement to give him what he believes he deserves. This self-loathing and guilt makes Flowey relatable at the last moment, before he flees. You're back at the spot where you first saw Flowey, where he no longer sits. As you enter the underground again, the credits roll. After that I got a call from Sans. I'd made a snowman really happy. Way earlier in the video I mentioned that I took a piece of a snowman and that he wanted me to take it far away. I'd kept that piece of snow in my inventory the entire game. I'd honestly forgotten about it, and for it to actually pay off was hilarious. It was rewarding. Sans explains what has happened since I left. Undyne now rules, looking for an alternate way to break the barrier, hoping to declare war on humanity. Sans has been knocking on the ruins' door, hoping to get a response, but none will come. After the phone call, the game's finished. That's Undertale. As I've said a few times, in my first playthrough I only killed Toriel, so going into the actual pacifist run was largely the same. As that's the case, I'm going to skip all plot, stopping only when something new actually happens. So let's get to it. This time around, Flowey asks you not to kill anyone, proving there is some continuity here. I'm playing the game for a second time, and it knows that. When Toriel walked in, I got unreasonably happy, knowing that this time I wasn't going to fuck it up. The ruins before Toriel's house are made more bearable thanks to your knowledge of them. As Toriel goes to destroy the door to the underground, she asks you to go to your room. Well, I actually did that this time, even having a nap, but unfortunately it didn't change anything. When Toriel is asking you to prove yourself, she notices that you look shocked because you're hearing the words she said before you ended her life last time. This will happen regularly, the game acknowledging that this isn't your first time round, and it all works together to preserve the feeling that the world has been reset, not reborn. Remnants of your last journey remain in the fabric of it. Going into the fight against Toriel, I still wasn't sure how you spared her, but the fight does a good job of nudging you towards the answer. If you try and talk to her, you get this text. You thought about telling Toriel that you saw her die, but that's creepy. Can you show mercy without fighting or running away? Thanks to my prior knowledge, I could take the time and think over the options you have in battle, coming to the conclusion that I could attack but purposely miss. As you do that, Toriel begins responding, and that was so rewarding. She stops trying to put distance between you. The music stops and she begs you to go back to her home. After enough time though, she contends with her feelings, understanding that hers aren't the only ones here, that she should accept that you want to leave. I stepped out into the underground with a renewed sense of purpose. I was going to prove to Toriel that me going out into the underground won't lead to death or violence. I was going to make her proud. Snowdin plays out largely the same, which is good and bad. I would have liked if maybe puzzles were a variation of the first playthrough, using the same mechanics but having different solutions. As it is though, it's not a big deal. Puzzles are so bite-sized that once you remember the solution you can fly right through them. Sans actually mentions how weirdly good you are at the puzzles. These details, combined with the fact that Sans was the one who told you about the true meanings of love and EXP, makes me think that he has more self-awareness than others, that he understands something bigger or outside of the underground is going on. It's great that the game leaves these breadcrumbs as it gives you a completely new motivation going forward. It wasn't my primary goal, but it did make me pay close attention, even though I'd been through this before, just to see if I'd learn more about what Sans knows. Another small thing that changes is the title screen. I was greeted by Sans and Papyrus, but most notably, Toriel sleeping in her chair. It's a cute little thing that lets me pat myself on the back each time I play. Small choices you can make along the way, like on the date with Papyrus, never ultimately change the outcome of everything, as the dialogue is just written to somehow circle back around to where it was already going. I wasn't expecting great diverging paths, but in a game that tries so hard to make each battle and interaction unique, it's a shame that these dialogue-based interactions have little variation in them, especially as the game seems to expect you to replay it, and on a replay you'll probably choose different options to try and get the most out of the game. Something that makes replaying the game that much easier is the music. It becomes recontextualized as you move through these areas again. As an example, Waterfall has this slow, kinda syrupy music. On my first playthrough it was empty and echoey, fueling my curiosity and want to explore, but this time around it was comforting and peaceful, like I was just strolling through at my own pace, knowing what turns to take and choices to make. I didn't feel this about every song and area, but it happened every now and then to give me a new appreciation of these areas and music. Interestingly, the game is actually made harder on a non-violent run, as you have less HP at your expense. This is a great decision as it shows the challenge that comes with challenging yourself. If we are so used to being violent in other games, we find it harder to do the opposite in Undertale, exaggerating to the player that you are in fact going against your instinct in a way. In the fight against Undyne, she this time calls out my goody two-shoes stick, not my violence. It was nice to have an indicator that I had not ruined my run. That did make me a bit wary though. I was worried I would get to the end not having filled some criteria I wasn't aware of, but I'd not killed anything, so what else could there be? I'll just keep going. I got to the castle, got vindicated as Sans said I strive to do the right thing, and then fought Asgore. I still didn't know how to end the fight peacefully and was worried he was going to die again. As he talked, he revealed why he had hatched this plan. I felt helpless, waiting for Flowey to kill him again and for me to get the same ending, but Flowey didn't show. Asgore says you, him and Toriel could be a family, though soon admits that was a silly fantasy. Asgore believes you are the prophesized angel that we heard about from the turtle merchant, so he sacrifices his soul, hoping you can find a way to break the barrier from the outside. He believes that's what Azriel would have wanted. Then Flowey shows up, destroying Asgore's soul and skipping our fight, knowing it's pointless. What the fuck? That was the pacifist ending? So, after the credits, I get another call from Sans. Toriel now rules as queen, and the Underground will treat humans as friends. There's no chance of freedom anytime soon, but Sans believes it's coming. He has hope. He has determination. It was ultimately satisfying and worth playing again to get the different outcome, but seemed a bit limp. Not as different as I was hoping. Okay, so I didn't get the actual pacifist ending. I had to befriend Undyne? This really confused me. I mean, Undyne was way more of an antagonist than Papyrus and Sans were. Sure, I saved her life, but where would I go to befriend her anyway? Well, you're told that by Papyrus. He calls you up as you run away from Undyne, where he says the three of you should meet at her place. This seemed so clearly to be a joke, and just a joke. I mean, he says this as she's trying to capture you, not to mention that I hadn't a clue where her house was, so I was further led to believe it was purely a joke, but it's not. I think this part of the pacifist run is pretty sloppy. The hints are there, but in the wrong places. Things like going on a date with Papyrus are purposefully just a bit out of the way so that the player has to make the conscious decision to do the peaceful thing. So I understand the need to conceal the decisions that led to the feeling of these pacifist prerequisites. But like I said, this is too concealed. If Papyrus is called shortly after you saved Undyne's life, I think it would serve its purpose better. 1. You would not be taking the call under the pressure of the fight, so it'd be more memorable. 2. You take the call knowing you just saved her life and she just passed up an opportunity to capture you. 3. You won't even get the call if you don't save her life, meaning you still have to make the decision to do the peaceful thing. And 4. As it happened not long after she tried to capture you, it still could be misconstrued as a joke, leading players not playing completely peacefully to brush it off as nothing more, upholding the concealment crucial to its purpose. Now as for the knowing where her house is, well, yeah, that's on me. I didn't make the correlation between this house in Waterfall and her face. I do appreciate that even though I didn't do all the right stuff, the ending still changed in some ways, but man, this experience took a lot of the wind out. I had to load my save back up and do the other stuff I had missed, so the feeling of doing it myself was stripped away and I didn't feel like I was fully to blame for it, so I was a bit frustrated too. I mean, if it isn't obvious, I love the game, so I got over it, but it's just one of those things that tarnishes the experience a bit. Especially if you're making an analysis video about it, and now your structure of analysing things as the game naturally progresses is just completely fucked with, and you're gonna seem like an idiot to everyone who watches. Gee, glad I'm not doing that then. God damn it. Papyrus stands outside Undyne's home. It was exciting to have the feeling of having no idea what was going to happen again, especially, as I said, with Undyne being clearly more aggressive and concrete in her hatred of you. That doesn't really follow through though. Undyne is certainly way more opposed to being friends than Papyrus or Sans, but the opportunity to explore what makes these two feel at odds is not really taken. It's still a whole lot of fun though. You get to see how her and Papyrus interact, which makes these characters feel way less disconnected, especially since Papyrus and Sans rarely show up after Snowdin. But on some level this friendlier approach does lead to something being said. The two of you seem completely at odds, in Undyne's eyes anyway, yet when you go to her house she's just as goofy and charming as the other characters. You're not all that different, just coming from different places, convinced that your placement preordains that conflict will follow. It shows that our expectations, like the expectations to kill your enemies in a video game, don't always make that much sense. That they can easily be misinformed and that trying to be open-minded can broaden your horizons. I said that Sans' monologue in the castle is Undertale's ultimate statement, but it's fortunately not the only one. Becoming friends with Undyne explores this concept from a different angle, adding nuance and depth to its insights about both the world of Undertale and the assumed violence and hostility of video games. Undyne makes you tea and points out that you chose Golden Flower tea, Asgore's favourite. This demonstrates how the game carefully places details that are of note to anyone playing regardless of playthrough. If you've taken the pacifist route first time round, this detail serves as foreshadowing for Asgore and Toriel's loss of Azriel, which you learn later down the line. But from the second playthrough on, it instead becomes a detail which fleshes out our already established knowledge of Asgore. Undyne expounds on her own backstory, talking of training with Asgore and becoming the head of the Royal Guard. She says she could never let Papyrus into the Royal Guard, believing him to be too innocent and nice. Undyne has enough self-awareness to acknowledge what the Royal Guard is, but is so set in her ways that she doesn't question that institution. Despite that, she's kind in her own way, affectionate towards you. There's a contradiction in her beliefs that doesn't show willful ignorance but naivete. She's been indoctrinated into this universal disdain for humans in a unique way, being convinced that her position is inherently righteous, despite the fact that that very position is predicated on the oppression of others, all while ultimately being similar and capable of being allies with those people she's to be oppressing, if she were to step down. She's a bit like a cop or someone in the military. But let me be clear, the context and material conditions of the monsters in Undertale is of a people who've been thoroughly suppressed by humans, making the response more understandable, and the people, monsters, still reachable. Undertale creates a unique circumstance for its characters that fortunately distances them from the concepts and backwards rationalization of policing and military, avoiding any direct comparisons of the monsters, an oppressed class, to systems like the police and military which help perpetuate the divisions between oppressive and oppressed classes. The needle is threaded really well here to create characters that are presented as villains while still being redeemable thanks to their circumstance. Not to say Undertale is making this comparison, that's purely my point of reference, not something baked into the game. Undyne gives you a cooking lesson that ends with her house in flames and she feels defeated, thinking she couldn't even manage to make you two friends. You're thrust into one last Undyne battle, which quickly ends as she realizes that you don't want to hurt her and that, actually, she doesn't want to hurt you either. She compares your inclination to avoid violence to Azriel. Here, she realizes her attitudes towards you were wrong through direct comparison and relatability. Once she connects with you on a personal level, the realization strikes. You're not actually that bad. But it's not all undone instantly. Undyne still says she will hunt the next human who falls into the underground. Undertale shows the beginning of Undyne's journey when it comes to de-escalating her hatred of humans, acknowledging that this kind of change isn't instant and requires genuine engagement and intent from the person who's changing. That's something unique to the Pacifist run. The game's characters and world become more complexly and interestingly written. Your reward for peace is to experience more of this world, showing that although seeing your numbers go up in an RPG is gratifying, there's still gratification to be earned when approaching a game from this non-violent angle. It's proof that just having to kill isn't factually the most rewarding playing experience. Undyne goes to live at Sans and Papyrus's place now that her house is burnt down, and has a favour to ask. She'd like a letter delivered to Alphys. It's a personal letter, and explaining its significance to the player would require vulnerability, so she instead insists that she hates Hotland and doesn't want to go there herself. As we interact more with Undyne, we see that her characterization backs up her attitudes towards humans. Someone who is afraid of opening up this much, someone who is this loud and aggressive, is the perfect fit to emphatically hate humans as much as she does. To deliver this letter, you basically have to travel from one side of the world to the other, but this isn't nearly as frustrating as it could be. This dude in the boat can directly take you to Waterfall or Hotland, so getting place to place is not much of an hassle. And now that I think of these three areas, the connection between them becomes apparent. Snow and ice, running water, and extreme heat. The game uses these three forms of matter to communicate different feelings. Snowdin is quaint and cozy, Waterfall is isolating and dour, and Hotland is pressurized and energetic. Once you deliver the letter, Alphys misinterprets it, believing you to be the author, so you go on a date. A very awkward date at the garbage dump. Alphys admits to actually liking Undyne, not you. And thank God! Having both Alphys and Papyrus not like you romantically makes them feel so much more real, like they make their own decisions. I love Dragon Age, but everyone in those games is so into you that it's off-putting, and the process of romancing someone is so blatantly contrived, with you just piling compliments and random gifts onto them. But here, Alphys feels like a real person. I just showed up in the underground. Why would she possibly like me that much more than Undyne? And why would it be my decision? She should have the power to say no, and in Undertale she does. This all leads to an incredibly sweet confession between the two, which pays off more thanks to the time Undertale has dedicated to our understanding of them. The final thing to do for this true pacifist run is to go to Alphys's lab, where you can find a foreboding note telling you to take the nearby elevator to learn the truth. You reach an underground lab appearing to be abandoned. As you walk the halls, data entries show up. Alphys was tasked by Asgore to find another way to break the barrier. Alphys tries to formulate a method using monster souls. She discovers what causes human souls to persist after death, and determines it to be determination. So all those little messages we got each time we saved were proof of our persistence, and the persistence of our soul. The game met us with challenges, some that led to our death, but we still persisted each time to make it this far. And to go back a bit, when we made it back to the castle and saw no determination message, that was because Alphys had just told us that we'd have to kill Asgore. We'd have to do what we swore we wouldn't. This explanation gives more weight to such a small element and causes you to reflect and actually acknowledge your determination. Alphys plans to formulate determination and inject it into the souls of monsters. This requires monsters who are comatose, soon to die. This lab area has 4 keys that you must find to open a door. You explore the lab while uncovering more of Alphys's experiment. It's tonally different from everything else in the game, but not out of place. While looking, you'll have to battle these monsters, which are a disturbing amalgamation of monsters you've previously fought. In the Act menu, you have options that are available when fighting each of these monsters on their own. This leads to a lot of actions being possible in battles, forcing you to recognize the monsters in the mix and remember what action made them peaceful previously. To get out of these battles while taking minimal damage, you must properly know and understand the monsters you've been sparing, having some sort of notable connection and consideration for them. Your knowledge is tested, being rewarded for a genuine thought of these monsters as their own characters and people. On top of that, the game is distorting and perverting what is familiar, making its impact more effective. So, as for what we find out here, let's dive into that now. Alphys extracts determination from the 6 human souls and plans to combine that with monster souls in a soulless vessel to create a 7th soul, thereby being able to break the barrier. As for the vessel, Alphys chooses the first golden flower to grow in Asgore's garden. She fails to create the 7th soul, so returns the vessel and 6 human souls back to Asgore. The comatose monsters melded together, unable to handle the determination they were injected with the families never receiving the dust of their family members, causing them to harass Alphys. The flower, Flowey, is gone. Here we see the backstory of Flowey, being a soulless being that has life, but what we concretely learn from all this is why Alphys is the way she is. She had one task and failed. She felt she let everyone down and other monsters let her know about it. Her insecurity, self-hatred, anxiety and depression makes total sense, and we feel for her because we know she doesn't deserve to feel that way. Like the section with Undyne, here we're given the opportunity to dive into Alphys's character, get yet another perspective to broaden our understanding of monsters and how their experiences can differ just as much as ours. Through Undyne and now Alphys, we see that the hope Asgore planted in his people wasn't a good one. It led to monsters like Undyne, thoroughly driven by their hatred. It led to Alphys tarnishing the lives of monsters' families as well as herself, creating Flowey. Beyond these data entries, we also find some other interesting material. They're tapes, showing moments between the family of Asgore, Toriel, Azrael, and Nathan. Not who I'm playing as, but the fallen human. That's who you're asked to name when you start, even though the player will likely assume they're naming the person they play as. I named the fallen human Nathan, so that's how I will refer to them. These tapes talk of a plan that Azrael and Nathan have come up with, which appears to be obtaining 6 human souls. Nathan seems a bit cruel, laughing off when they and Azrael accidentally poisoned Asgore. This stuff was really interesting, but it was also starting to lose me a bit. I was worried stuff was going to get convoluted, especially with the potential of timelines being represented by different playthroughs. You use the 4 keys to unlock the door and find a way to power the elevator again. As you do, you run into Alphys. She's decided she'll tell the families what happened to their relatives, despite how hard it will be. Alphys in particular is so specifically relatable that seeing this change in her is significantly memorable. In the elevator you get a call saying you've helped everything fall into place, with the elevator freaking out and taking you right to the castle, with no way to re-enter. Sans is nowhere to be seen in the hallway, and this time when I checked the coffin marked Nathan, I realised that coffin was for the fallen human, not who I was playing. Meaning at some time, or possibly to this day, Asgore intended to take Nathan's soul. Asgore isn't in the throne room. He's at the barrier ready to fight already. It begins. Barely. Toriel is here. She realized it wasn't right to make you choose to leave or stay, to kill or be trapped. She chastises Asgore, soon interrupted by Undyne and your other friends, insisting that no fight happens. It's so sweet, but not to the detriment of itself. They could easily shove Asgore and Toriel back together to make it a perfect ending, but that wouldn't make sense, so it's not done. What happens here is kinda corny, but it works so well because it's earned and executed wonderfully. Alphys asks how Papyrus knew to call everybody to the barrier, and he replies saying a tiny flower told him. Flowey, who Sans had said was following Papyrus, is the only reason this reunion is happening. Then they're snared by Flowey, who has the human souls and now your friend's souls as well. He keeps dangling the perfect ending in front of you so that you'll keep going. Once you're happy with your ending, you won't play Undertale anymore, so Flowey prolongs it. The game basically just scrambles your understanding of everything you've done. Would killing as much as possible lead to an increase of stats and thus the power to actually kill Flowey? Would stopping here mean he lost, or would he still be happy knowing you never got the satisfaction, and will one day come back? This late into the game, your expectations continue to be twisted, and it's brilliant. Flowey attacks, ready to kill you again and again and again and again, but your friends help you by blocking attacks and healing you. The way they heal you is by speaking positively, encouraging you, enriching your soul, not your body. So it makes sense that even in that state, their belief in you can provide real support, because that heart has been a representation of your soul the whole time. Also, when Flowey gave that little speech, I didn't have a clue what would happen next. The game so thoroughly surprises you at such a constant rate that you are at once prepared for anything and nothing. You're shocked, but bought in a second later because nothing is out of the question in Undertale. Other characters like bosses, side characters, and even normal encounter monsters give encouragement. Flowey then harnesses their souls and... Asriel stands in front of you. This is Flowey's true form. A fight begins, and boy is it a great one. The weight of it is conveyed by the music, the ever-changing background and Asriel floating around, overlapping on top of HUD elements, not below, as though they are just another physical part of the encounter. Your act menu allows you to heal yourself or lower damage taken for the next turn, and when you die, your soul refuses, which is a cute little play on words. I think it's important that even though Flowey has been shown to take control of the game itself is still kindest on a pacifist playthrough. You're essentially invincible here and Asriel's not, meaning that Flowey is not actually capable of truly stopping you. Asriel does wish for that power though. He says that once you're gone, he'll be able to take over the timeline and reset everything. Our choices still have power even in the face of Flowey, who has taken some control over how the game plays out. Flowey/Asriel continues to mock the player, their attachment to Undertale's characters, and the determination that will have us replaying just to get a happy ending. Asriel transforms again, but this time you're stuck, your only option being to struggle. Asriel is now ending the timeline, resetting it. After some deaths you can no longer access the save file, but are able to call out to your friends within Asriel. As you reach out, you're taken to a battle with them. Here you have to think back to your memories of them, to act in ways that will remind them of you, and bring them back. Not only is it super satisfying to do this, but it efficiently shows off their arc, where they started and where they are now, thanks to you. Your choices and actions really feel respected here, like they had a significant effect. And so much stuff happens in Undertale that when you think back to the things you've learned about them, it feels like the good old days in a sense. On top of this process of thinking back and calling out to your friends is just what we did with the amalgamations in the lab. It's continuing to show that although the monsters aren't quite as significant to your playthrough, they're just as important within the world. Once your friends are saved, you reach out to do the same to Asriel. When you do so, you see the memories of Asriel saving Nathan, but why would you have those memories? As you keep saving Azrael, his attacks get weaker as his reluctance grows. After all, a monster's power is tied heavily to their emotions. Azrael talks to Nathan, saying they're only doing this to keep them around because only the human understands them. He's not ready to say goodbye again. Seeing the tapes in the lab, the coffin marked for Nathan, the fact that that name is who your level is ascribed to, and now Azrael talking to them, it made me wonder if we were some reincarnation of them, if that's what all the humans have been so far, and that's why Azrael doesn't want to lose you again, because then you'll be back, ready to be lost all over. Coming out of the battle, Azrael stands in front of you, back in their normal monster form. He knows Nathan has been gone a while and learns that your name is Frisk. With other monsters' souls inside him, he can love again, as opposed to his soulless flowery form. He asks for forgiveness and you give it. As his final act, Azrael breaks the barrier with the power of everyone's souls, freeing monsters. You comfort Azrael and, before leaving, he asks you to take care of Asgore and Toriel, as he will inevitably turn back into Flowey without the power of the souls. Okay, before we go on, some stuff has to get said. First off, Azrael says that he knows Nathan isn't there, which immediately proves wrong what I said about being a reincarnation. Great work, Nathan. But the other evidence, like Nathan showing up next to the love, or level of violence, is still there, so there's some connection between the player and the fallen human. With that connection being clearest in the level of violence, perhaps Nathan is the potential of violence within you. But that we will probably find out. Next, holy shit, the game managed to make Flowey an understandable villain that you have sympathy for. I mean, they kind of cheated by turning him into a cute goat monster, but still, holy shit. And finally, that is such a fantastic fight for this playthrough. I mean, it just sums up everything the playthrough stands for and delivers so hard. You wake up surrounded by your friends, with it all being a bad dream. Having experienced what you just did, it's so good to see them again. They now use your name, Frisk. If Nathan is some presence within you, perhaps now it's completely gone, making you just Frisk. As far as your friends remember, there was a flower, a flash of white, and the barrier was gone, with you in the dream. Toriel gives you time to do anything you may feel the need to before going to the surface. First of all, I stumbled around trying to get exactly in the middle of the group so the composition of the thumbnail would be just right. Other than that, there wasn't anything else I needed to do. No loose threads I was compelled to follow, no quest to complete, but I didn't walk to the surface. I went through and talked to every single character. I seriously took like half an hour just getting one last memory with these people, and they all had something new to say. With the triumphant music in the background, it was like some glorious victory lap. I've said the word rewarding 11 times so far, sorry for the bad vocabulary by the way, but this was the most rewarding thing of the whole experience, including what's to come. You save the world in a lot of games, but in very few do you get to talk to every single character of that world you just saved. Everyone had something to say about what had just happened, what it was like being free, what they were going to do in the future, and to have everyone talk about the same thing with such reverence and hope made it so worth it. Fuck getting a bunch of money, some good gear or an achievement. This is how you reward a player. If you think your world is worth caring about, give the player proof that it cares back, because it's such a fantastic experience, one unique to the interactive medium of video games. Seriously, if you've played this game before and didn't do this, give another Pacifist run a try and make sure to hit everyone up before leaving to the surface. It's worth it. And to anyone who's not played Undertale before, keep this in mind when you do play, because you really should give it your time. I'm talking like it's the end of the game, and on some level I wish it was, but it's not. I'm going to save leaving to the surface for the end, because we'll need it after what's to come. I really didn't want to do this. I've talked of my love for these characters a lot, so to undo their happy ending and then kill them to satiate my own curiosity wasn't something I was looking forward to. I probably wouldn't have done it at all if not for this video, but maybe that's what I'm telling myself to avoid the guilt. This is the genocide run. You kill everything. It starts off with Flowey making you confront what you're doing. At the title screen, you're given the ability to true reset. This means all memories will be erased. Even Flowey, who had some self-awareness across playthroughs, will be back to normal. I named the fallen human Nathan again. I didn't really want to, but it felt right. If the character you control is Frisk, then you the player would be the potential for evil within that character, so it just made sense to name them the same thing. I kill the dummy in the first frogget you face, which Toriel would usually scare off. Once I got to the second save point, the frogget that tells you that sparing is an option isn't there because I just killed it. The effects of your violence are felt within the world immediately. Part of the genocide run is killing every monster in each area. This includes random encounters. There are only a finite amount within the ruins, Snowdin, Waterfall and Hotland. Actively pacing around the ruins waiting for an encounter made me feel psychopathic. I was much more aware of what I was doing, searching for stuff to kill. The satisfaction of leveling up is completely removed when you know what it really stands for. Once you've killed all the monsters in a given area, the music changes. In the ruins it's droning and haunting. It's like now that all other life is gone from here, you can hear what you sound like. Having gone through here 2 times before, I knew the music well. By this time I was humming along, but by sharply shifting it, you're pushed out of the familiar and the comfortable. The active change makes it feel like the game is judging you. When you save after the area is empty of monsters, you don't get a description of what's making you determined. You just get the single word, stated plainly. This is because you're single-minded. You don't draw your determination from the details around you, but from the ambition within yourself to kill all life that you may run into. You still find encounters being interrupted while you travel, but nothing shows up. You're made to see where a life would have been if you had not erased it. Napster Book disappears before you can reach him, your reputation already preceding you. The game's characters are reacting to your decisions to make them feel realer, and to make you feel worse. Your evil isn't just demonstrated through direct acts of violence, but also those that lead to them. It's my 3rd playthrough by now. I know what characters are gonna say, so I skipped repeated dialogue. From the monster's perspective, I rush along conversations and interactions to get to the killing faster. Like I said, single-minded. And by skipping this dialogue and not acknowledging what's being said, I further distance myself from whoever's talking. Despite all this talk, I was still dreading the Toriel fight and what I'd be doing. I just wanted it to be over with, but I've never hated getting what I wanted more. One shot. When this happened, I actually gasped out loud and put my hand over my mouth. I just looked at it in disbelief. You can see, I just pause here for a while, taking in what just happened. It's such a profound moment, one that stops you in your tracks and, once again, makes you consider what you've done. You run into Flowey as you leave the ruins, and he says something. He knows you're Nathan, knows that the foreign soul inside of Frisk with the potential for evil is truly in control. Flowey, or Azrael, reveals his plan and asks you to help him with it. You leave the ruins, well, ruined, and venture out into the underground. The first dialogue with Sans is different, and you don't hide behind the vase when Papyrus comes over. The interaction is basically completely skipped, as though the game knows you're not here for what you've already seen. When you go to leave, Sans asks if you'd keep pretending to be human, to make Papyrus feel good about seeing one. With this and then Sans' speech in the castle, it seems like he does have a level of awareness the others don't, an awareness that isn't gone despite the true reset, hinting at some far-reaching power. Once Sans says this, the Snowdin music that plays is slower, and when you save, it says 16 left. 16 monsters left to kill in this area. Just out of efficiency I started grinding here. That's what you're really doing. The game is replicating grinding, but presenting it to you under its own context to make a point. Grinding is boring and repetitive, so what do? You listen to music or a podcast. If you're emulating something, then maybe even speed it up. But by doing that, you're increasing the distance again, finding ways to remove the reality of your actions. The slower music makes it feel like the world is ambling along, like you're slowing it down and killing it. The world wails, whines and whines, like it's letting out the world's death knell. What were previously lively strings now sound sour and limp, and the slowing down of the digital instruments adds this distortion that makes it seem like it's having difficulty, barely eking out and being heard. Once everything is dead, that same droning from the ruins plays. Further proof that the music does represent the voices and feelings of monsters in that area. Your character walks right through Papyrus's shock puzzle, taking control from you. If Nathan is meant to represent me, then this is me being shown that the evil I've let loose in Frisk is separating from me and gaining control as it does so. Later on, a switch for a puzzle has been, quote, depressed with vines. Flowey is actively assisting us. By losing all of our other friends, we've gained a new one, who is really an older one. At the random puzzle, you're treated to more new dialogue. It's plenty entertaining, but it's all underpinned with the knowledge that you're eventually going to kill them. Papyrus gives up on starting the puzzle, and finding out that his enthusiasm wasn't as endless as it seemed is kinda heartbreaking. You're seeing these characters that you love at their lowest, and the only person who can be blamed is you. After crossing the bridge towards Snowdin, Sans threatens you, saying that if you fight Papyrus as he believes you will, you're going to have a bad time. This does a similar thing to the moment in MTT Resort, but it's more effective here. I've seen, heard and felt the game respond to my actions in the Genocide run, and so Sans' threat doesn't feel empty and out of place because this time it's been legitimized. When you arrive in Snowdin, no one's there. At all. It's abandoned. The store owner has left a note asking you not to hurt their family. You can take any items you want and steal whatever money has been left. This is your reward for how you've played. You can have as many healing items as you can carry, and have all the best gear free of charge. But it's not given by an NPC you helped out, but rather forgotten or ignored in the haste with which people wanted to escape you, as word had spread. The Genocide route is very confrontational, but here we see en masse, in clear view, what we're doing to this world. When you enter the shop, text pops up, reading, but nobody came. This is the same message you get when you have an encounter after having killed all the monsters in an area. Even in a playthrough dedicated to being as hellish as possible, the game tries to make sure you know that the monsters you killed and got EXP from are just as much people to be respected as the characters you could buy items off. It's a bit like the game is trying to reach you, that maybe if you make this observation, you'll question what you're doing. As you trudge through town, you realise just how much personality these tertiary characters injected into the world. The things they had to say weren't often all that memorable necessarily, but they were further proof of the heart and humanity the Underground has, or rather, had. There is one monster still hanging around in Snowdin, Undyne's biggest fan. They say that everyone else has gone and hid somewhere, but they aren't worried, as Undyne will protect them. Yet another example of the game protruding points across playthroughs, emphasising just how much this child has been told to look up to Undyne and her position. Walking into the fog, you're met with Papyrus. He offers to help you to stop walking the path you currently follow. When you enter the fight, Papyrus is sparing you. You've officially become the monster. The way we gave all those other monsters a chance by sparing them is the way we're being treated right now. Papyrus is making no effort to hurt you. There's no indication that he's tricking you. We have absolutely no justifiable reason to hurt him. But we think we do. We've told ourselves that we're just doing this to see what happens, to see how the game changes. But is that justifiable? No matter how we phrase it, our determination is still driven by the want to kill. Seeing all the game has to offer is our reason, but the content of that goal is killing everything. The game has made us instead treat these monsters with kindness. But have we really learnt anything if we immediately fold on that as soon as we are presented with the possibility of seeing more? I don't think there's really an answer, and I don't believe there's meant to be. Undertale wants us to question ourselves, not answer for ourselves, so that the next time we play a game we ask those questions again, and maybe think back to what felt the best and proceed with that, with the answer hopefully being benevolence. It makes a lasting impact with the hope of having these questions sit with you. Falling off the bridge in Waterfall makes more sense thanks to our better understanding of the narrative. Asriel is the one talking to Nathan, and this appears to be some sort of memory. Perhaps the memory is spurred by Nathan falling onto a bed of golden flowers, and maybe on the Jedicide route, Flowey has placed those flowers there to save you and allow you to continue killing. The Turtle Merchant is still in his shop, offering a completely different perspective. He's not intent on hunting you down, and he's not running away. His life has been too long to bother himself with fear or anger. You're able to threaten him here, providing another avenue with which to guide your antagonism down, making it seem more all-encompassing. This playthrough was the first time I found the Tem village. Tems are these weird little monsters who are supposed to be goofy, but when I visited it was more or less abandoned, and the store owner now felt less quirky and more creepy, as it was no longer surrounded by all the other Tems. The way the game leverages its control over contextual elements is really impressive, and engaged with often to keep providing unique experiences. The Undyne fan confronts you, wondering if you're really as bad as Undyne says, and this time you are. You enter a fight with the child. I'm gonna have to kill a kid. I mean, I don't have to, but I want the bad ending. What am I gonna do, not be a child murderer? Don't be ridiculous. I did it through a pained face, waiting for what was to happen while really hoping it never came, and luckily my wish was granted. The establishing text here says, "In my way." The evil force of Nathan is gradually gaining more control as love increases, speaking to you and providing the only reason they need to kill something. It's in their way. You attack the fan, but Undyne dives in to take the hit. She starts to turn to dust, but refuses. She hangs on through pure determination. The thing that monsters are said to lack is there, ready to be harnessed and controlled. As Undyne gives her speech, the music chants along. You really feel like the villain here, but in a more specific way. It feels like you're being towered over, looking on with regret as you realise what you've just created, waiting for them to unleash that newfound power on you. And that's exactly what I got, because this fight is brutal. You use the same rhythm game adjacent mechanic, but this time dialed up a lot. I had trouble with it on other playthroughs, but here it was deadly. That feeling of being overwhelmed and regretting what you just created carries through the fight so well. Your first time facing these attacks is bound to have you taking hits. It certainly had me doing so. And then on top of that, when I went to heal, I realised I only had monster candy and spider donuts, the first healing items of the game. My power had made healing unnecessary, and so now I was on the back foot, trying to regain my health back 10 at a time, then losing it 15 at a time. It all snowballs together to end the fight quickly and have you intimidated for the next attempt. For me, it had me intimidated for the next 30 or 40. I tried to be Undyne for 3 or 4 hours and never got past 2/3 of the way through. I got some better healing items from the Turtle Merchant, but I still couldn't get very far. The rhythm moves are designed to disorient and overwhelm, with them being packed tightly together to make it hard to predict what direction will be next, or by having these yellow arrows which switch directions at the last moment. Those in particular did my head in. For some reason I couldn't wrap my head around them fast enough to actually block them properly. I looked up some strategies online and found that I'd missed the optimal weapon for this fight, and by not fighting a specific enemy type over and over, I'd only got here at level 10, not 11. If I wanted to get a better chance, I was going to have to start all over again. Or download a save from the internet. Yes, I know, I cheated, but just to lay it out. Like I said, I'd tried this fight for hours and got nowhere. and to get somewhere it seemed like I was going to have to replay a lot while extending the grinding process just to get one more level. On top of that, I already had thousands of words of notes and a lot to say about the game, and I didn't want to scrap a video this long because there were one or two things I just wasn't skilled enough to do. And to embarrass myself even further, I couldn't even do it with a save that had all the best items and was level 11. I actually used a save from right after the fight. I'm really sorry. I really did try, but I just couldn't do it. So, to try and be fair, I won't say anything about the gameplay of this fight that I never got the opportunity to experience. I'll talk about what I actually played and leave it at that. Hopefully you understand. Getting crushed by this fight did still offer some sense of reward. As I was now playing the villain, thanks to this fight I still got to see the hero win and save all the monsters from what threatened them. Without playing the game through twice over previously, this reward wouldn't really exist. It's only through having a personal investment in Undyne that we're able to derive some sense of triumph from our defeat. Undertale keeps justifying your previous experiences by taking advantage of the affection you feel for this world and its characters, which is a really smart way to build a new playthrough out of your other ones. We find out from Undyne that Alphys has been evacuating monsters to safety, and that Asgore has absorbed the 6 human souls. She passes with hope running rich in her heart thanks to her friends, much like how we felt during the fight against Flowey/Asriel. Hotland is empty as well, but Mettaton is in the lab, though soon leaves. In the lab you can find unopened letters from different monsters. Thanks to our knowledge of Alphys' experiments, we can now see that these are from the families of monsters who she tried to use in her experiments. Even when characters aren't here, we still learn about them thanks to the game's attention to detail. Without Alphys here, the traps in Hotland aren't set up, creating an excuse that makes this route's efficiency tie back into the narrative. Throughout Hotland you'll find these electric barriers. They showed up every now and then in previous runs, but here they feel like a cheap method to stop you from exploring different parts of this area. I suppose you could try and say that Alphys erected them to impede you maybe, but it ultimately feels like a rushed solution to having you avoid these sections. As expected, the MTT resort is just as empty as everywhere else. What sticks out about this area though is how the game changes up its treatment of you. Throughout this whole route, the game's been chastising you, forcing you to look at what you've done and really stew in that, but here it adds another dimension. Braddy and Caddy have left letters for you at their shop. These letters aren't written out of fear, but out of a desire to just tell you to fuck off. They just make fun of you. Undertale's found a way to still communicate its humour even under such dark circumstances. It shows a great understanding of its own character, and shows off the versatility of that character. It then does this again immediately through the fast food worker within the resort, and as a fellow wage slave I definitely relate. The core can be completely skipped thanks to its core structure. In the core you have to hit some switches to get a central elevator operational. In the initial playthroughs this approach serves as a sort of culmination of the game's central loop, which is puzzles and combat, but here it allows you to completely skip that area thanks to that central elevator already being operational. This represents the game's largely respectful attitude towards the player, even when you're endlessly searching out to destroy everything the game stood for. It respects what you're doing in terms of the game playing experience, which is replaying it for the second or third time, but on the ground level doesn't respect your actions within that game playing experience. So it will forge a structure built to let you get through the parts you've already seen much quicker, while making characters themselves to test you and attempt to absolutely block or stop your actions within the game, the best example being Undyne. You have another fight with Mettaton, though this time it swiftly ends in brutality. Walking through the castle silently, something strange suddenly hit me. Nathan's face. Previously, Frisk's face seemed to be a little gag, looking utterly disinterested in whatever was happening, but as I walked on and looked out over the underground, it became legitimately unsettling. This sounds very silly, but it really reinforced just how dead-eyed and empty Nathan was, like a soulless soul. It doesn't help that no music plays. Earlier I mentioned the music changing, possibly reflecting the feeling within that area, and that's why it drastically changed once Nathan was the only one left. And so if we track that up to here, Nathan really is empty, just a husk that unflinchingly walks onward to exert their power and cruelty. You make it to Asgore's home. You're interrupted by Flowey this time, talking of waking up as a flower. Although comforted by Asgore, he feels nothing. As you interact with objects in the house, you will at times be met with red text, talking from a different perspective it seems. It's Nathan commenting on these objects and their relation to them, from when they were a part of the family. In the home you can find the knife weapon, a counter to the toy knife found in Toriel's home at the beginning. At the start you were trying to be the genocidal character, imitating it, but now you've become truly deadly. Beyond that though, this weapon is here in Asgore's home. It belongs, or belonged, to someone. It sits in the same room as the locket, a very powerful piece of armor. This room is Nathan and Azriel's. We see what we've become. When you equip the knife, text shows up saying, "About time." Nathan is happy to finally be holding their weapon. Flowey continues, talking of his attempt at gaining some sense of compassion, but he never managed to muster it. He finds Toriel and hopes that she'd be able to restore his feelings, but she failed. Flowey felt life was pointless without anything or anyone to love, and so ended their existence. As Flowey passed, he regretted his choice, unknowing of what happens to someone who is soulless when they die. This desire to hang on, this determination, had him wake up like it was a bad dream. A bad dream. That's what Toriel says when you wake up after fighting Azriel on the pacifist route, meaning that you likely died but woke up again thanks to your determination, thanks to saving. Flowey experimented with this power and decided to befriend everyone. He soon grew bored of it though, already knowing what they would say and what they would do, so he killed them, just to see what would happen. He used all the excuses that I use when justifying my decision to kill everything. And then he chastises you, the viewer, by saying that at least he isn't one of those sick people who watches it happen. Yet again commenting not just on the experience of a video game, but the community and discourse that evolves around it, with people feeling better than others because they were able to kill everyone. So, really, me being bad and not being able to kill Undyne makes me better than everyone else who did actually finish the game legitimately. Flowey grows tired of it all, having done everything, until Nathan, something truly unpredictable, came along. Flowey could no longer load his save as Nathan's determination had surpassed his. Flowey believes that Toriel must have taken Nathan back to the ruins and given them a proper burial when they first died. Then the flower bed Frisk fell onto must have been that burial, which tracks as they were Nathan's favourite flower, the last thing they'd wanted to see before death. So did Nathan infect Frisk after they fell into the ruins? That makes sense as that's where Nathan's soul, a human one, would persist. Nathan's determination was greater than Flowey's as it was backed up by my determination and Frisk's determination. Flowey would now like to free everyone, just to see them suffer on the surface, and will forego the things he was going to do with the power of the human souls, we saw what that would be during the neutral run, if it means you can live on the surface together. Every time Flowey pops up, you are thrown into a pseudo-battle screen, but the text reading Nathan is nowhere to be seen, unlike usual. To me, this says that Flowey is talking to Nathan directly, with those same words being applicable to the player. Nathan is beginning to truly embody us, and vice versa. Flowey says you're both the same because you wouldn't hesitate to kill the other if they got in the way. Nathan then does this, sort of threatening Flowey. He regrets what he said. You've become threatening and more evil, even in comparison to the character who wants to use their godlike power to terminally torture everyone, planning to do so for eternity. This whole section is poignant and biting. Its predictions are correct and its criticisms fitting. Undertale finds new things for you to question about yourself, to create a self-reflection that evolves and develops over time, to give you a better understanding of yourself and video games as an art form. The game is never sticking its nose up at you though. There's not a sense of superiority, but rather a sense of relatability. It feels like you're watching someone impart the introspection they went through about games onto you, just to see how you respond and react to it. None of this would be possible without compelling characters, charming writing, engaging interaction and thoughtful design, all of which Undertale succeeds at. You're confronted by Sans again in that same hallway. You're now going to have the bad time that he promised in the MTT resort. And I didn't disappoint. I certainly had a bad time. At the MTT resort I found Sans very non-threatening and unbelievable as a powerful force, but that's all undone here. After dying, Sans acknowledges that this isn't your first attempt, and continues to do so as you try again and again. And you'll be doing that because holy fuck is this fight hard. On my third attempt I made it through the first gauntlet of attacks, which Sans says are his hardest. And then the song plays, the one I've heard so much of. I finally get to hear it all. Yeah, Sans dodges your attacks, clearly displaying himself as outside the constraints of the game, and follows it by some very precise attacks. On the fourth attempt he cuts his little speech short, completely taking me off guard. The fight keeps finding ways to surprise you and essentially cheat, but it's not frustrating, it's captivating. This challenge looms over you, and I was excited to see what I'd die to next. I did start to see new attacks and dialogue, but progress was very slow. The fight only actually progresses if you try and attack Sans, so healing must be kept to a minimum. Sans' attacks weave all the combat concepts used previously, while simultaneously evolving them to create a fight that feels like it's been built out of and on top of your whole journey across playthroughs. Throughout the fight you get dialogue from Sans. He was aware of the different timelines being engaged with by the player and felt the game end. He's now been living with the knowledge that each time you begin playing, you will stop playing. Knowing this has made him complacent. Nothing feels like it has purpose when it will all be reset one day, only to be back at the beginning with no memory. Despite all that, he has to stop you now, considering what you'll do if he doesn't. After enough attacks, Sans asks something. He asks you to stop the fight and consider that in another time, he was a friend. He wants you to become who you were when you were on the pacifist route. He's sparing you, but also giving you an opportunity to heal. I had struggled to get to this point, which actually made me cast aside the desire to be spared, because I didn't want to have to get back there. So I healed up and attacked. Then the fight really got going. Sans flickers you between these micro challenges one after the other. Projectiles now move over the HUD, making the process of navigating menus itself dangerous. Sans was hoping that the player, who he calls the Anomaly, would stop playing once they were happy with the game, presumably after getting the pacifist ending, that making those friends would be enough. But we went back for more, this time to do the total opposite. In a good villain, we often look for understandable motivations that make them believable, yet we, as a villain, lack those entirely. Where Asgore wanted to save his people and keep their hope alive, we've decided to commit genocide just to see more of the world. Imagine if Kuja from Final Fantasy IX wanted to destroy the world as an excuse to go see Italy or some shit. That's kinda what we're doing here. And I think that's interesting. We haven't just become a villain, but one that would be considered unrealistic or uninteresting because of how purely evil and unknowable they are. So, to talk about the difficulty of the fight. Sans' attacks only do 1 damage, but they do that every frame. You also take a special type of damage called Karma, which causes your health to tick down over time. The hardest thing about it is the length. I was able to devise some reliable strategies, but when it came to the second half it was a lost cause. You have to face these attacks a couple times before you can really try and see what works to avoid them, but when you have to go through a few minutes of almost perfect gameplay to actually get there, getting those chances becomes harder and harder. I honestly found that once I was trying to keep the latter moves in my head, I would perform worse at the beginning ones. I got maybe 75% of my way into the fight, but that was the closest I got. I tried for about 8 hours before I made a deal with myself. I didn't want to cheat the fight. So I decided to begin writing the video, and every night I would dedicate some time to fighting Sans, and if I got to the end of writing the pacifist route and I still hadn't beaten him, then I'd cheat. And guess what? I finished writing the pacifist route and Sans is still there, alive. Again, I'm really sorry about this, but now he didn't just have notes, but over 10,000 words written about the game. I couldn't let it end here. I don't think the fight is badly designed. It personally asks too much of me, but I'm not letting it colour my opinion of Undertale negatively. I still think it's a brilliant section. I ended up just using a cheat that would replenish my health to max periodically, which did preserve some of the tension. Later into the fight, Sans begins to talk of his special attack. Before that, he slams you against the walls of the combat box at a high rate, ramping up the pure speed of the fight. Then the next turn he does it again at yet a faster rate, before rapidly switching between moves, forcing you to adapt and react quickly. You're thrown down what is now a combat hallway, dodging obstacles and dealing with a few more complicated box bashes before these skull beams fire constantly, replacing each other and never letting up. After that, Sans continues to bash you against the box, feeling frustrated and fed up. His attacks slow and eventually he stops, exhausted. Sans uses his special attack, which is to do nothing. Sans is just going to stall forever, deny you the satisfaction that comes with victory. This fight is as hard as it is to force you to stop. It's supposed to be unfair so that you leave this world and its people alone. Sans sort of begs for you to just quit, and I felt for him and everyone else, but that didn't make me stop. Every criticism the game has leveled at me can't really be denied, and that's what makes it so uncomfortable. The fight overall is so heart-pounding and climactic, it's unreal. I know I was a naughty little cheater, but I still really value the time I spent on it, even the 8 hours of failure. The fact that the fight holds up as well as it does speaks to the strong mechanical core of the combat, despite the game being more about the characters and narrative. Here Undertale creates that same cool feeling violence of other games, but gives it so much more weight thanks to how the game's crafted and predicted the player's experience. As you sit there, the heart will glitch out if you touch the left wall. Sans begins to drift off, but hitting the left wall wakes him back up. This prolongs this silence, while also causing you to pay more attention to Sans's face, as he sort of twitches when you hit the wall. Through this single decision, the game gives you some level of response, causing you to repeat it and make this silence longer and more boring for the player, while also making the player study Sans's face and actually realize that if you stay still, he'll fall asleep. Once he does, you can push the box to the left and eventually down over the fight button. You one-shot him, like so many others. He asks Papyrus if he wants anything at Grillby's and turns to dust. You're now level 20. I was exhausted after this and totally unprepared for what was to happen. Undertale never lets up on its commitment to subversion. Even in the closest thing to a traditional video game challenge, it never settles, constantly being itself, unashamedly. That red text shows up again in the coffin room, saying it looks comfortable. In the throne room, Asgore says a flower just warned him about you. Asgore doesn't recognize you as a human, but a monster. Suddenly, you enter combat. You have no choice. Nathan's taking control. Asgore insists this can be solved peacefully, but Nathan doesn't falter. They attack Asgore. Flowey lands the final blow out of nowhere. He tries to explain to Nathan that he can be helpful. He doesn't have to die. Flowey, now speaking in Asriel's voice, asks Nathan not to kill him. Nathan doesn't listen. Flowey's death is so ugly and relentless. At this point I had my hands off the arrow keys. I seriously no longer felt in control. A human is on screen. It's Nathan. Nathan states plainly what I've already explained. The power we sought to increase our stats and see more of the game was what awakened Nathan. We doomed this world. It's been mentioned, it's been touched on, but to actually hear Nathan say it in a positive way, to thank us for it while our control is stolen by them, it made me regret it. I wanted to go back and do the pacifist ending again just to make myself feel better. And now I don't know if that will be possible. Our stats increasing was actually Nathan's stats increasing, hence the name next to the level. Nathan says there's no point being here anymore. All is dead. They want to erase the world, the save, and move on. Maybe to another save, maybe to another game. Undertale understood that we'd name the fallen human after ourselves, as is custom in RPGs. So Nathan is me, and that potential carries over even when playing a different game. You have the choice to erase it. I chose no, and Nathan doesn't like that. An attack is made, and something dies. The game crashes. After relaunching, you're met with an empty screen and some howling wind, reminiscent of the barrier. While on this screen, I began taking notes about what had happened. After some time passed, text showed up. I've returned here, and you're asked if you think you're above consequences. I said no, but that was a lie. I had chosen not to erase the world, and I'd tried to say I wasn't above consequences. When I had to truly face what I created, Nathan, I tried to run away and go back, to try and deny what I'd done. I simultaneously hated and adored what Undertale had done to me. I felt ashamed of my decision in a video game. It was fake, made up, but to some extent it was true. It was representative of me, I just didn't want to accept it. The voice offers a compromise. It takes your soul and in return brings the world back. I accepted. The game crashed, and when I launched it again, there it was, truly reset. I started a new game up just to see if it was a true reset. I had to name the fallen human again. The only name that made sense was Nathan, because I had become the potential evil that rested in me. The name was more fitting than ever. I've deliberated over a decision in an RPG before, but none had me accept something of myself that I denied was there. This is what video games have the potential to do, and Undertale dares to do it, pulling it off flawlessly. The game was truly reset, by the way, but not really, because I was part of the game. I interacted with it and pushed it forward, and although the world has been reset, my memory hadn't. When I saw Toriel, all I could think of was what I had just done, and I didn't want to go on. I felt guilty. I didn't want to look at them. And again, it's all just code. They can't see me, but it felt like they could. That's just how good Undertale is. By stopping and not doing the pacifist route again, I'd be avoiding consequence again. And so I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be someone who takes responsibility and does the right thing. The game forced me, a player, a person, through a character arc. Jesus Christ. I wanted to end on a happy note, leave these characters that I adored with a happy ending, and I wanted the same for this video, so let's go get that ending, shall we? The last characters I talked to before leaving to the surface were Frisk's friends. Seeing them all not dead was so good, it was such a relief. The things they say are funny and entertaining and emotional. It's an end that feels like a beginning. Having seen the worst, seeing the best and knowing I did it through my own guilt was fulfilling on a fantastic personal level. I felt like I had seriously grown as a person. When you save and it's called the end, you're not walking to kill Asgore at the barrier, you're not losing control and having to face the demise you laid upon everyone, you're taking a step towards a new opportunity with people you've grown to love. And I was ready. Everyone looks over the horizon and marvels at what they see, what they feel. Asgore asks Frisk to be an ambassador for the monsters, someone to connect the two races. Papyrus goes off to make a good first impression with the humans, and Sans, Undyne and Alphys follow. Asgore soon leaves as well. Toriel asks what you'll do. You have the choice to stay with her or go back. To where, I don't know. I chose to stay with her. Like I said, I didn't really know anything about Frisk. To me, it just made sense to stay with the people who loved them, the ones I knew loved them. The two walk off hand in hand. We see the credits of all the different monsters, characters and creators. Everyone is living a happy life, free from the restraints humans had put upon them. Undertale is so many different things. It's critical but celebratory, kind but really fucking hard. Simple and at the same time complex. It's a story and experience that only video games could deliver. It's a testament to what this industry and medium can do, and I think we should all admire it for that and take note. I cherish what it's given to me and what I gave to myself because of it. Some serious thought and consideration. Consideration that has made me better. To everyone who contributed to this game, thank you so much. You made something incredible. And to everyone who watched this video, sorry for not completing those fights. Hopefully you can forgive me. I understand this doesn't cover everything, and it's kinda personal, but I want to analyse my experience with things, because no two will be the same, and they all offer something unique, something to learn from. Beyond that though, Thank you for watching. I appreciate any support, and knowing that I was able to provide some entertainment means the world to me. The last thing you see is Toriel putting some butterscotch pie in Frisk's room as they sleep, just the same as in the ruins, but this time, free.